Chapter 587. However, there was a drastic change in the battle after 10 seconds. Seeing that the Flash was playing around with him, the man in the leather jacket came up with a little trick. He deliberately lowered his attack speed, making the Flash mistakenly think that he was running out of energy. Then he suddenly exerted force, and an electric arc as thick as a bucket hit the Flash's chest. Was it similar to Electric Lady's ability? Thea just realized that something was wrong. The electric arc didn't disappear after the attack, but became a bridge connecting the two. At first it was silver-white energy, but then the energy suddenly changed its nature. A large amount of golden energy rushed out of Barry's body and gathered on the other side with the help of suction. The power of speed. Thea was shocked, and reverse lightning almost stood up. The power of speed was accumulating more and more. Not only was Barry dumbfounded, but the man in the leather jacket who was absorbing his energy also panicked. He didn't know what this energy was, but he instinctively felt that it was more powerful and harder to control than the energy he absorbed from the city's power grid. Stop him! Reverse lightning was anxious. Thea also knew that this was a serious matter, so she directly teleported out. Unfortunately, she was still one step too late. The ability of the man in the leather jacket had a fatal flaw. He could only absorb energy, but he didn't know how to stop. Usually, he would absorb energy until there was no energy left. He always thought that his body could store unlimited energy, but today's encounter with the power of speed taught him a good lesson. A large amount of the power of speed was accumulating in his body, but he was not the son of the power of speed. He couldn't mobilize this energy at all. Before Thea could think of a magic to interrupt, his whole body exploded from the inside out. F***CK. Faced with the impact of the turbulent energy, Thea could only retreat to the subspace temporarily. When she came out, she found that the man in the leather jacket was like being possessed by a monster. There was a big hole in his chest and abdomen, and he was lying in a pool of blood with a frightened face. Half of his heart was blown away, and he died. On the other side, Barry didn't have the ability to retreat to the subspace. Fortunately, he was the son of the power of speed. The energy was all absorbed from his body, so it didn't cause too much damage to him. A minor character who wouldn't live for more than 2 chapters, and didn't even have a name, killed the Vanguard General of the Justice League, the Flash. Who would believe that? Thea looked at the pitch-black surroundings and directly took the jacket man's body. His body was very valuable for research. This guy's ability was like the DC version of the star-sucking great magic. Although the hidden dangers were huge, if used well it could be very effective. If he could create thousands of clones while maintaining his abilities, he would be able to suck Darkseid's blood dry. After decorating the scene, he sprinkled some pieces of clothing and blood on the ground, proving that this person had been blown to smithereens. It would be even better if Reverse Lightning suspected that this person had been sucked into the Godspeed Force space. When she sent Barry back to the laboratory, everyone hurriedly started the backup power supply. There was another round of chaos. The Firestorm duo also helped. After a series of blood tests, everyone was dumbfounded. Barry's lightning speed was sucked dry, and he became an ordinary person. Everyone was very depressed. Thea looked at Reverse Lightning from the corner of her eyes. She saw that he had taken off his glasses and was holding his forehead. He was exuding a lingering sense of lethargy. Yes, the threat of the 2 human-shaped nuclear bombs was still there, and the Flash, whom she had spent so much effort cultivating, was now useless. Reverse Lightning was already acting like a cripple. Thea wasn't too worried. Barry's protagonist aura wasn't any worse than Batman's. The son of the Godspeed Force would at most be depressed for a while, and his Godspeed Force mother would definitely give him his abilities again. At the very least, Thea knew that reenacting the scene when he was struck by lightning would allow him to regain his Godspeed Force. Other people would turn into charcoal after being struck by lightning, but he would regain his Godspeed Force after being struck by lightning. This world was just that illogical. However, Thea didn't tell them this method. Reverse Lightning was 10,000 times more impatient than she was. It was better to let him think of a way. Not long after Barry woke up. Looking at everyone's ugly faces and the bruises on his body, he seemed to have thought of something. At this critical moment, the veteran had to step in. Reverse Lightning was actually very sad, but he still had to pretend that nothing had happened and comfort Barry instead. His life mentor gave the Flash a lot of chicken soup. Compared to him, Psyker's conversation skills were very poor. What did he mean by Barry is still Barry without abilities? What did he mean by, you will always be our friend? These words were very depressing. How could having superpowers be the same as not having them? Thea saw that Reverse Lightning was about to beat Psyker up, so she quickly pulled him away. Everyone was silent, and only the rustling sound of Reverse Lightning looking at Barry's body data could be heard. Barry's matter was very urgent, but the matter of the 2 human-shaped nuclear bombs was even more urgent. The equipment that she had helped them develop was interrupted halfway by the power outage and the leather jacket cameo. Now she couldn't stop work just because Barry had lost his speed. She had to continue. It was just that the originally enthusiastic atmosphere was a little cold, and the few of them were no longer as energetic as before. Thea could only helplessly liven up the atmosphere and use the opportunity of explaining the theory to distract their attention. This theory was also very interesting. It was a parting gift from the fat old man when they were on the Wave Rider. However, she had been getting stronger and stronger, so she hadn't found a use for it. Now, using its ability to absorb and recharge energy, it was like a switch that could help the Firestorm duo to merge and separate at any time and place. As soon as he heard that it was the result of nuclear physics research and not some magic or witchcraft, the fat old man's interest was immediately raised. He pestered Thea to ask about the operation. She explained it to him. When the old man heard that he understood most of it and could roughly understand a few parts, he immediately recovered some of his spirit. Thea was a little embarrassed. Using the old man's future research results to fool the current him was really a test of how thick his skin was. When the device was finally set up and the worries were solved, the 2 of them no longer hesitated. Even if they died, they would drag 6 million people down with them. Neither of them would do such an evil thing. The 2 of them clasped their hands together. With a muffled bang, the Firestorm with Ronnie as the main body and the fat old man as the auxiliary came into sight again. Thea put the device on their chests and adjusted it slightly. The 2 of them were very educated, so they quickly figured out the specific operation method of this thing. Professor Ronnie, even if you are separated, you can't be too far away from each other. One of you is in Chicago, and the other is in Center City. If you don't have a place to go, go to my Alien Administrative Committee. It's in the desert area of Nevada. Even if something happens to you, it won't be a big loss. Thea meant to pull this guy to the Administrative Committee. It was really a little embarrassing to rely on the black man to conquer the world every day. As the chairman, Miss Thea couldn't always fight for her own image, so it was imperative to recruit someone who was especially good at fighting. Chapter 588. Firestorm's strength was not as good as the top few, but he was still one of the best. This guy could transform all inorganic materials, and could even create kryptonite with his bare hands. His body was strong, his intelligence was good, he could fly, and he could use energy attacks. He was a rare jack of all trades. What if we explode there? Firestorm was still a little hesitant. He even wanted to find a deserted place to die. There are aliens there, Thea said casually. The few of them immediately understood. Were aliens human? That was for sure. But if they had to choose between sacrificing 6 million aliens and 6 million Earthlings, they would not hesitate. Even Barry, who was a saint, did not say anything to refute. Professor, don't worry. With my technology, I won't do what you think. Besides, there are 2 alien races that are still using nuclear energy. You can go take a look. Maybe you can get some new inspiration. Without much consideration, the 2 of them decided to go to Nevada. Ronnie did not mention his marriage with Caitlin again. It was too awkward to find a wife when he had a telepathic connection with the fat old man. When one of them was excited, the other would also have a strong telepathic connection. Ronnie would not be able to roll in the sheets happily for a long time. The fat old man also had this problem. He was old, but he also had a wife. Nuclear fission had changed his body. He looked old, but he was not much different from a young man. He did not want Ronnie to know about his passionate communication with his wife. The 2 tacitly left Central City and flew towards Nevada. Seeing the humanoid nuclear bomb fly away by itself, Reverse Lightning breathed a sigh of relief. What was left was the matter of the Flash. To be honest, Reverse Lightning was really worried about Barry. Unfortunately, He couldn't leave his name behind even though he had done a good deed. That feeling of frustration was indescribable. While Thea was dealing with Firestorm, he thought hard and finally came up with a solution that was not a solution. It was similar to Thea's idea. They just needed to recharge it. But Barry hesitated. In the face of 20 million amps of electricity, he did not dare to say that he could survive. Thea knew that he was the son of agility, but he did not know. Reverse Lightning anxiously waited for the result. Barry shook his head and said, "Let me think about it." After saying that, he picked up his coat and left the laboratory without looking back. Thea also bid farewell to the others. She had tricked them over, so she had to make some preparations. She did not dare to use the teleportation spell to bring Firestorm over directly, mainly because their condition was too unstable. If they exploded during the teleportation, she would be in serious trouble. Although nuclear weapons did not have a high level of technology, she was not willing to face the impact of a nuclear bomb head-on. Since Firestorm could fly by himself, she would let him slowly fly over. Thea rushed to the administrative committee first, and informed her subordinates that Firestorm was going to join the company. Only then did she return to Star City. One must know that she was pulled out of the hot spring while she was soaking in it. It didn't take her more than a few minutes, so she could still go back and soak in it for a while. The girls were still chatting mindlessly, completely unaware that the crisis of the city had already been resolved. The idea of a female couplet gradually took shape in her heart. The venue, the purpose, all needed to be carefully considered. There was still a long way to go before it was officially established. It wasn't until the girls went home that she found out that Barry had returned to the laboratory after she left. Because Ayers was in danger, Barry could only brace himself and accept the electric shock from Reverse Lightning. Fortunately, the results were good. His mother had not given up on him, her biological son. The Flash was in high spirits and played the hero again to save the black girl. The matter of Firestorm was satisfactorily resolved, and Barry Allen's ability was restored. However, there was still no end to the hatred of his mother's murder. A vague fog shrouded him. He had a hunch that he was very close to his mother's murderer, but he had not found any key clues. Thea did not have much time to pay attention to the battle between Lightning and Reverse Lightning. She was super busy now. She did not even have time to study the body of the man in the leather jacket. She was busy making a mascot. Moira won the party's primary election with a large number of votes. This first step was very stable. The next step was to give a national speech, a show, to let ordinary people know her political views and character. As a family member, Thea could only help to build momentum. Originally, Oliver was also a good choice, but compared to Thea's explosively good reputation, his reputation was too bad. The staff collectively rejected Oliver's proposal to walk around the country. They only asked him to be present in a few key cities. The rest of the time, the task of accompanying the mother fell on Thea's head. She did not have stage fright, but she had to be gentle, decent, approachable, and not steal the limelight from the mother. This was a bit difficult. The mother of a superhero. This was the biggest card that the staff had prepared for Moira. It could be said that it was a card that no one had ever played before. The superhero story in the United States was really high. Many people were encouraged by Moira. It was as if Thea was so strong not because of magic, not because of the source, but because of the liberal democratic system. For a long time, the young lady became the other people's child, in the mouth of everyone. A large number of middle-class people expressed confidence in Moira's ability to govern. In fact, there were not many fools these days. The reason why the current government was powerless in the face of many unexpected situations was that they did not have an important force in their hands. If the president was replaced by Moira, there would be no problem at all. With a phone call, the superhero would fly over. Thea also contributed a photo of herself with Superman and Batman. The two big bosses owed her a lot of favors. Although they were very reluctant, they still took a photo of her as if they were going to the execution ground. After that, the campaign began to advocate, using the reputation of the three superheroes to endorse Moira. For a time, Moira's popularity was 20% higher than the other party's candidate. There were a lot of benefits in being tied to the superhero campaign, but naturally there were also troubles. Many medical workers who lost their jobs because of Thea's medical cabin went to the speech venue from time to time to show their dissatisfaction. The aliens who were dealt with by the Alien Administrative Committee also launched some attacks from time to time. Even Ben, an old friend of Batman, was hired to make trouble at the scene. Yes, Thea felt that this guy was here to make trouble. The 2-meter-tall muscular man with a green can on his back was kicked more than 10 meters away by her in high heels. He did nothing other than sprinkling some green water on the ground. Moira's staff slowly went from the initial panic to later numbness. They also felt the outstanding force of the young lady. They had only seen it on TV before, which was far less exciting than the scene. The rocket was bounced back to its original place with a snap of a finger. The gunman was scared to pee his pants with a look, and the aliens of all colors and appearances were still flying around like bowling pins. Chapter 589. Every day Thea heard the same platitudes. The staff racked their brains to prepare a speech for Moira. If it weren't for her eternal life, she would really think that it was a waste of time. Several major candidates were still running around. Even if their strength was not as good, no one admitted defeat. Moira, who now maintained the lead, would not relax. She pulled a large group of candidates from one city to another to fool them. Central City. This was the third time Thea came here in the past 6 months. After learning about today's itinerary, Oliver also came to help. At this time, Moira was on the stage talking about the political strategy. Thea and the secretary were talking about the company's affairs in a low voice. Oliver was comforting his good brother Barry not far away. Thea listened a few times and really sympathized with this guy. Unlike the loving Oliver, Barry has nothing to say about love. He only loves Iris West. And just this morning, the love of his life moved out of home and lived with her boyfriend. This boyfriend was not him. When Barry mustered up the courage to confess to her like a defeated dog, Blackie decisively rejected him. Most of the time she said something like, "We are friends, you are a good person." This blow to Barry was no less than the disappearance of the power of Godspeed. It was hard to catch Oliver. Thea felt that she was gloating a little, but it was not good. But she wanted to laugh when she saw Barry. Barry would not know that in a place where he could not see, there was actually a person who was suffering more than him. That was Reverse Lightning. Because Iris's taste in men was very strange, she chose a police officer named Eddie Swan in the Sea of People. This handsome police officer was Reverse Lightning's 48th generation ancestor. He was his direct ancestor in the 21st century. His own direct ancestor and the Flash's wife were together. When the time came, would it still be his 47th generation ancestor? This was simply murdering Reverse Lightning at the source. Unfortunately, he couldn't use force against these two. Iris was too important. In the original timeline, she and Barry had a large number of speedsters. Reverse Lightning didn't dare to make a move. The Silver Superman was able to kill his own mother regardless of karma. But Reverse Lightning didn't have that ability. Every time he saw his ancestor and heirs having sex, he felt like his heart was about to stop. If they had a child, his chances of survival would be infinitely close to zero. Reverse Lightning felt like he was a bug trapped in a spider's web. No matter which direction he moved in, it was a dead end. Moreover, the more he moved, the tighter the web became. He was anxious and hysterical, but he could only keep all these in his heart. He could give Barry some ideas on how to use his Godspeed, but when it came to picking up girls, he couldn't help even if he wanted to. Especially when his own ancestor had already eaten Blackie inside out. He lamented his misfortune and was angry at his incompetence. This was his attitude towards Barry. Sia's supervision allowed her to see Reverse Lightning hiding in a small dark room by himself. He was running around in circles, trying to figure out a way to deal with the situation. Unfortunately, no matter how smart his brain was, no matter how rich his knowledge was, there was no solution to the love between a man and a woman. In fact, Thea didn't see how attractive Blackie was. It was a pity that Barry couldn't forget her. There were so many good girls out there. Why should he hang himself on airs? While she was blindly pondering, she heard a commotion in the distance. The bodyguard beside her also reported in a low voice, "Many citizens seem to be possessed. They are attacking the perimeter." Speaking of which, being able to become Thea's bodyguard was really a lucky person in the bodyguard world. This employer was 1,000 times better than the bodyguards. She didn't need their protection at all. Most of the time she acted as a background check. Sometimes she could even protect them when they were in danger. Coupled with her explosive good looks, She was pleasing to the eye and had a high degree of safety. The position of bodyguard of the chairman of Quinn Group was almost a position with benefits. Thea looked into the distance. It was indeed as the bodyguard described. 30 to 40 citizens were charging towards them as if they were possessed. Further away there were 70 to 80 people beating each other up. It was a bit like the effect of magic. Thea observed carefully. There was no aura of magic elements. Instead there was a faint smell of emotional energy. She automatically looked at Barry, who was not far away. He nodded slightly, left the crowd and rushed over like a bolt of lightning. It was a bit like an unspoken rule that superheroes would attack criminals in their own jurisdictions. If there were no local heroes, then it was not a big deal for Thea to take care of them. If there were, then it was best to let the locals deal with them. For example, previously in Detroit, someone had planted an explosive device during a speech. It was defeated by the local superhero, Female Fox. The riot was quickly quelled. The scene was too chaotic. Thea didn't see who was behind it, but many citizens couldn't remember what they had done after they woke up. This kind of strange thing happened every day. If everything was investigated to the end, then there wouldn't be time to do anything else. Thea was relieved to leave the follow-up to the Flash. He was in a bad mood so he could relax. That night, Thea had just taken a shower when she heard a rapid knocking on the window. She opened the window and felt a little dizzy. She saw Oliver standing by the window, fully armed. Barry is in trouble. Protect Mother. I'll go take a look. After that he shot a few arrows and flew away like a swing. A few black lines appeared on Sia's forehead. Could this kid Barry still live happily? How did something happen again? She activated her supervision. After searching for a long time, she finally found Barry in an alley. Good Lord. At this time, even with a mask, Thea could feel Barry's fierce hostility. The usual gentle sunshine had long disappeared, leaving only anger and bloodlust. The person facing his anger was Air's new boyfriend, the 48th generation ancestor of Reverse Lightning, Eddie Swan. But now the handsome detective was beaten up a little by the Flash. He was an ordinary person. He couldn't resist the Flash, let alone the Flash in his dark form. Who do you think you are? Do you think you can come in like this and get whatever you want? Who gave you the right to do that, you stupid piece of shit? The corner of his mouth that used to be quiet was now only ferocious. In the dim light of the night, his eyes were like that of a beast eating human flesh. Eddie Swan was confused by what he said. His head was full of question marks. Big brother, you have found the wrong person. Did you say that I did it? In any case, he was a well-trained young detective and he was quite agile. He rolled over and pulled out his pistol, aiming at Barry and shooting at him. The Flash, who had already been filled with anger, showed him the Matrix's bullet-dodging skills, followed by a series of words. Eddie Swan didn't think about the key points. He threw away the empty pistol and wanted to fight with the Dark Flash. Thea deliberately glanced at Reverse Lightning in the laboratory far away. She saw the old man's palms were blue and his nose was moving slightly. He wanted to transform into Reverse Lightning several times to save his ancestor. But in the end he forced himself to endure. Chapter 590. Thea couldn't help but sigh at the old man's determination. Looking back, the Flash and Eddie Swan competed with each other. To be honest, their martial arts skills were really weak in front of Thea, a contemporary martial artist. They were better than ordinary people, but their strength was limited. The Flash relied more on his high speed to crush the enemy, and Officer Swan's skills were obviously not good enough. In less than 2 rounds, Officer Swan was lifted by Barry with one hand. Ayers in the distance was scared. She didn't know why the hero in her mind, the Flash, hated her boyfriend so much. She also tried to stop the Flash with words, but unfortunately, her mouth was not good enough. The more she cared about Officer Swan, the angrier the Flash became. He originally wanted to teach her a lesson, but now he completely dispelled it. He wanted to break Officer Swan's neck. Thea didn't care about defying Lightning's life or death, but if the Flash killed Air's boyfriend, then he would be completely evil and there would be no turning back. Would the future Justice League accept defying Lightning as a veteran? She immediately shot, and from more than 10 kilometers away, she sent out a psychic blade and scratched the Flash's wrist. The Flash felt pain, and Officer Swan was naturally thrown to the ground. Just as Thea was about to save her, and defying lightning was about to save his ancestor, Green Arrow finally arrived. Thea's spiderweb arrow worked again. This enhanced spiderweb was more sticky and dense. Even the Flash was directly caught and couldn't get out for a while. Run! Oliver didn't know what Barry had taken wrong medicine, but he had to save heirs and Officer Swan. The man and woman felt a little inexplicable tonight, but their instinct to escape was still there. They helped each other to run away. Oliver began to talk again. Unfortunately, Barry was originally stimulated by the news that heirs had moved out to live with him, and now he was disturbed by external forces. Under the joint efforts of several parties, his rationality had long been thrown out of the window. His whole body began to shake wildly, directly shattering the incredibly sticky spiderweb, and a pair of scarlet eyes looked at Green Arrow. If Green Arrow faced the Flash who had lost his mind before, it would have been a bit difficult. However, now that he had received more than half a year of training from Ninja Master, and his sister had provided him with a lot of equipment, he didn't think that he would lose. With a light tap on a switch on the bow, a series of clicking sounds could be heard. Armor as light as a cicada's wings with an amazing texture began to equip itself from the wrist to the arm, and finally to the torso, head, and thighs. The raw materials for this armor were obtained by Thea and Diana when they captured the Panther Lady. The body of the Panther God was made into a speed-type armor by Thea with her advanced mechanical processing ability. The original silver-white shell was painted green and white by Oliver. The armor was powered by the new energy reactor newly developed by the Quinn Group. In theory, the maximum speed could exceed 2,000 kilometers per hour, and the reactor could allow the user to run at the maximum speed for an hour. The internal skeleton was made up of the body of the Cheetah God, and the exterior was covered with titanium alloy. The joints were made of reinforced glass fiber. In order to take care of Oliver, who was semi-illiterate, the operation interface was almost a simplistic version. The flight system, status system, navigation system, weapon system, and the navigation deployment module, which was specially set up to prevent him from being knocked unconscious, were all integrated together. Oliver's weapon was naturally still the bow and arrow, but now it had been replaced with a cannon. Diana loved the house and the crow that belonged to it. She had plundered a lot of divine metal from Olympus, and used modern technology to help him make a longbow. It was certainly not a divine weapon, but Thea felt that this bow could be regarded as a pseudo-divine weapon. When the bow was fully drawn, the speed of the arrow could exceed the speed of sound. However, Oliver didn't have any divine power or magic, and in the beginning he had to consume his own vitality to draw the longbow. Until the armor came out, Thea improved the energy supply method, and now this pseudo-divine longbow would consume the power of the armor. The Flash was a little stunned, but Green Arrow had already finished equipping. His combat experience was much better than that of the rookie Lightning, and he directly drew the bow and shot an arrow at his calf. He underestimated the speed of Green Arrow, and when Lightning wanted to dodge, it was already too late. With a poof sound, the sharp arrow pierced a hole in his calf. Blood gushed out, and the Flash pulled out the arrow, and the wound cells quickly recovered under the effect of the power of lightning. Barry, with a fierce look, stared at Oliver fiercely. Anger had already taken over his reason, and he had forgotten all about good friends and brothers. He only wanted to kill. The rushing figure brought out a yellow lightning, and Barry angrily rushed to Oliver. Oliver's normal speed was faster than ordinary people, but it was incomparable to the speed of the Ultralisks. Now that he had the power armor, it was very different. At this time, the remote artificial intelligence took over part of the function so he could focus on dealing with the enemy. Limited by physical fitness, nerve reflexes, and other conditions, the highest speed of the armor could not be used. Oliver could only maintain a speed of 900 kilometers per hour. It was true that the blackened version was 5 times stronger, and the whitewashed version was 3 times weaker. The Flash, who had exceeded the speed of sound in his normal state, was now even faster. In terms of speed, the Green Arrow was unceremoniously crushed, but he, who had been through hundreds of battles, did not panic. He exchanged a few moves with the Flash. It was actually a polite way of saying it was exchanging moves, but in the eyes of outsiders it was more like a one-sided beating. The energy reserve of the armor continued to decrease, and Oliver had roughly figured out the Flash's style. His moves were that he had no moves. Relying on his speed, he would take advantage of his opponent's weakness and throw a few punches. When the opponent reacted, he would run and look for another opportunity. Oliver tried to open up the distance twice, but the Flash caught up and beat him up. He could only use a trump card. With a flick of his wrist, the smoke bombs that were originally installed in the armor were launched 3 times in a row. The Flash did not know what it was, so he did not take it head-on, which created a good opportunity for Oliver. Thick and thick, as if it could not be dispersed, white fog covered most of the street. Oliver turned on the optical camouflage on the armor, and disappeared into the thick fog as if he was invisible. "Do you think you can hide like this?" The Flash searched around but did not find any trace of Oliver. With a cruel smile, he began to run quickly on the spot. The air was stirred by his speed. Even if the smoke bombs were black technology from Batman, they were slowly dispersing. Oliver was very calm. He knew that Barry's recovery was amazing, and he also knew that his ability was mainly focused on his legs. His main aim was his legs. With his legs injured, no matter how capable he was, he would not be able to run. "Papa," he quickly pulled the bow, and the bowstring made a crisp buzzing sound. Because the movement was too fast, the sound was transmitted through the air and had a unique charm. Chapter 591. In less than 10 seconds, Oliver had shot hundreds of arrows. While shooting, he was also moving quickly to avoid being caught by the Flash. Hundreds of arrows were shot from different angles and heights. Every arrow was aimed at Barry. Regardless of the accuracy, the choice of direction, or the grasp of opportunities, Oliver could be said to be the best archery master in the world. There was no one who could compare to him. In terms of archery skills, not to mention the original Yao Fei, the current Thea, even Batman and Ninja Master were not as good as Oliver. If the maximum level of long-range attacks for others was level 10, then Oliver's maximum level was level 12. This was his talent. Now, after more than half a year of teaching by Ninja Master and the assistance of the black technology armor, his talent had been magnified by several times. To hit the Flash, who was running at a high speed, was a technical skill. Prediction and prediction were indispensable. The wind resistance caused by his crazy running was also a key issue for the archer to consider. Oliver did a good job in these aspects. Although more than half of the arrows were shot, the remaining arrows could still hit the target. The Flash realized the danger he was in. His speed, which was already much faster than usual, increased by a lot. Unfortunately, Oliver did not manage to dodge a few of his arrows. At the moment when they hit, the Flash also saw through his optical camouflage and learned to throw lightning without a teacher. This kind of lightning, which was produced when he ran, contained a trace of the power of speed. It was very fast and arrived in the blink of an eye. Obviously, it was later than Oliver's attack, but the golden lightning still hit Oliver first. The speed of the lightning was too fast, faster than Oliver's reaction speed. Even though the auxiliary system had detected the energy reaction, he still could not dodge it. The system could only use the backup plan, which was to activate the energy shield and take it head-on. With a boom, the lightning hit the shield, and the energy was quickly depleted. The collision between the golden lightning and the armor's energy finally ended with the armor's victory. However, the armor, which was almost at full power, had reached the lowest operating alert level. The total energy was less than 30%. This attack had at least depleted more than half of the armor's energy. The Flash on the opposite side was even worse. Oliver had the armor to support him, but Barry completely relied on his flesh and blood to deal with the sharp arrows made of Olympian metal. Oliver's attack angle had been calculated by the onboard computer, and all possible dodging directions had been taken into consideration. Barry had tried his best, but there were still 6 arrows that he couldn't dodge. At this time, the Flash was extremely miserable. 6 arrows were stuck in his body from different angles. He was trembling and half kneeling on the ground. Blood was flowing out of several wounds. To outsiders, he looked like he was going to die at any time. When Oliver aimed again, the Flash lost too much blood and finally couldn't hold on any longer. He fell to the ground. "Bastard!" Someone roared from afar. Seeing that Oliver was still in the posture of drawing his bow, that person no longer had any scruples. He raised his arm and fired 2 shots. The Glock 18 reminded him at the right time and circled the attacker, which was displayed on Oliver's interface. How advanced! Normally, when he was fighting those drug dealers in Star City, he couldn't see the characteristics of this armor. But now, after fighting with Barry, Oliver finally understood many of the functions of this armor. There was no need to dodge ordinary handgun bullets, and there was no need to activate the protective shield. The armor's own defense could be ignored, not to mention that he knew this middle-aged black man with an anxious face. Barry Allen's adoptive father, Central City Detective Joe West, was also the father of heirs West. His daughter didn't know the true identity of the Flash, but he did. Now that he saw Oliver shooting Barry like he was a target, he didn't even care about the professional ethics of a police officer. He only wanted to avenge his adopted son. Barry is fine. He seems to have been bewitched by something, Oliver whispered with a voice changer. Before Joe could say anything, a few people from the Advanced Technology Laboratory drove to the scene. Reverse Lightning, who pretended to be a cripple, saw that Barry was fine and let out a sigh of relief. This kid was too good at courting death. Everyone wanted to go back to save Barry. Oliver thought for a while and followed them. On one hand, it was out of concern for his friend. On the other hand, he was afraid that Barry would still be the same when he woke up. What if he was still in his evil state and killed all the people in the laboratory in a fit of anger? He could at least be safe if he followed him. Different from the original time, Oliver was surrounded by weak chickens. In order to protect his family, he didn't dare to expose his identity. Now, with Thea stirring up trouble, even the natives of the South Pacific Island almost knew the name of the Quinn family. It didn't make much sense for him to hide his identity. Moreover, these people were Barry's friends. Oliver felt that they could be trusted. Soon after he got into the car, he took off his armor. After knowing his true identity, it naturally caused a wave of surprise. However, with Thea as a target, Oliver's identity wasn't too surprising. Not long after returning to the laboratory, Barry finally woke up. However, he was still very weak. Although Oliver had avoided his fatal spots, 6 supersonic arrows were shot on his body. Even with the enhancement of the speed of the cells, it would still take a long time for him to recover. Not to mention that he had lost a lot of blood. Is this the armor designed by Dr. Quinn? It's an extraordinary result. Reverse Lightning looked at the armor that Oliver took off and praised. Oliver was a serious sister-con. When he heard people praise his sister, he was happier than when they praised himself. He smiled and chatted with Reverse Lightning for a while before finally asking the main question. What happened to Barry? This man is called Babulo. Psyker put the image on the big screen. On the screen was a middle-aged man. One was a picture of him as usual, and the other was a picture of him at the scene of a crime. His eyes were scarlet. His ability is very strange. Anyone who looks into his eyes will become abnormally angry. He had caused a few riots before, but it was all quelled by the Flash. We thought that Barry was immune to Babulo's ability. Who would have thought? We should capture him as soon as possible. This man is very dangerous. Oliver was ready to capture him. Psyker clicked on another video awkwardly. When you were fighting the Flash, he was captured by a group of unknown people. Oliver put down his bow and looked at the video again. There were more than 10 fully armed men in the video. They were all wearing special glasses. It should be some kind of light filtering device. Psyker was afraid that Oliver didn't understand, so he explained. Unfortunately, no one paid attention to him. The unknown people were obviously well trained. They cooperated well. Some kicked the door, some covered, and some captured. The whole battle lasted less than 10 seconds. The middle-aged man named Brock was knocked to the ground. They ignored the bags of money that he had robbed and swiftly captured him. Chapter 592. The unknown person was extremely nimble. After taking the person away, he directly blew up the room, leaving no clues at the scene. Oliver watched the video twice but still found nothing. The other party revealed too little, so it was impossible to infer the truth from the known clues. Not long after, Barry Allen, who woke up, also used his professional skills as an evidence technology expert to investigate the scene, but the result was still no trace. The guns and explosives used by the other party were all from the black market. If they wanted to thoroughly investigate, they would need to share the information of the police all over the world. However, even a fool would know that this was impossible. Everyone in the laboratory took turns and used all kinds of technology. In the end, they could only give up without any results. The person who kidnapped Block was naturally Miss Thea. She watched Oliver and Barry fight like she was watching a play. She thought that Block's ability was good, so she directly ordered her subordinates in Central City to capture him. While Oliver and Barry were searching for clues, she left her incarnation to protect Moira and went somewhere in the underground of Central City. Death Knell, who was famous in the underground world, relied on her huge financial support and originally controlled many industries. After Thea obtained the divine position, the entire underground world seemed to be unguarded against her. The value of the underground world's existence was not to develop spiritual civilization. Its essence was trade, information trade, weapons trade, employment trade. This was the mainstream of the underground world. It could be said that every transaction was carried out under Thea's nose. Political leaders of various countries, the crown prince of the Middle East, African warlords, there were a lot of shady things going on in the underground world every day. If you don't take it, you will be punished. Thea knows the details of every transaction, so naturally, she won't be polite to this group of people. Using the advantage of having omniscient information, Death Knell personally took action and used all kinds of shocking methods to almost unify the underground world. It was not easy to find a small person like Block who only knew how to rob banks and only knew how to rob banks. Thea came to a villa area on the outskirts of Central City. The owner of this villa was one of the counselors of Central City. It was said that his family history could be traced back to the Mayflower. Unfortunately, the owner was very stubborn and refused to let go of the tradition. He could be described as a stubborn old man. No matter who it was in Central City, they would avoid this stinky and stubborn guy. In the eyes of outsiders and this owner, this was his residence. In fact, in the huge complex of buildings, whether it was the housekeeper or the workers, they had all been bribed. Except for a few rooms that the owner frequented, the rest of the buildings had been transformed into the stronghold of Death Knell and the others. Now this unlucky Block was imprisoned in the basement. Thea sized up this middle-aged man and looked at the materials that her subordinates had prepared for her. Sure enough, Block was his fake name. This person's real name was Roy Bigelow. Roy G. Bigelow, abbreviated as RGB. Thea almost mistook it as another evil abbreviation. She did not continue to dwell on the name. This guy had committed many crimes and could barely be considered a second-rate villain. In the future, he would even have the nickname of Rainbow Bandit. If not for Thea's participation today, he would have continued to play with the Flash in the future. Now it was not possible. She carefully sized up this guy with an evil name. The sedative was still in effect. The target's eyes were closed and his wrists were tied with chains as he hung on the beam in the basement. If other people were kidnapped, even if they were unconscious, their subconscious would still reveal some signals, such as an inadvertent frown or nervous trembling of their fingers. These signs did not appear on this middle-aged man. He was completely unconscious. He did not worry about his own situation. This did not mean that he had an iron will or a firm revolutionary belief. It was that this person did not have fear. His sensory function was completely filled with another emotion. Anger. In Thea's sight, his body was filled with a deep red emotional spectrum. Red was the color of anger. Amazing. Thea sighed inwardly. She did not know if this guy was too lucky or if she was too lucky. Mastering the 7 emotional spectrums had always been her goal. Currently, she had just obtained 2. Fear and pity. The red light of anger, the orange light of greed, the yellow light of fear, the green light of courage, the blue light of hope, the green light of compassion, and the purple light of love. Among the 7 spectrums, the green light of courage was the most peaceful and the easiest to control. With the green light as the center, the left side of the spectrum was all negative emotions, and the right side was all positive emotions. At least from a universal perspective. The further away from the green light, the more extreme the emotions were, whether it was the red light of anger or the purple light of love. Thea had been hesitant about whether to touch these 2 emotions. She did not like to go to extremes. Now this small character gave her another opportunity to touch the emotional spectrum other than the light ring. Unlike the complete emotional spectrum on the light ring, there was always a limit to personal anger. If Thea faced anger alone, she would definitely be affected. But if she only faced a psychic as a god facing a human, the probability of mental imbalance would be minimized. Come on, let me see your spiritual world. Thea's finger gently moved, and a somewhat mysterious rune was engraved on the middle-aged man's forehead. The iron chains in the basement were blown by the strong wind from the spiritual world. The middle-aged man's expression showed a thoughtful look. Like a slideshow, a picture was projected into the room. The childhood of dropping out of school, the youth of stealing cars, these life experiences were meaningless. Thea directly skipped the 30 years of the man's life and focused on the later years of his life. The middle-aged man's face was pale as she read his memory almost crudely. Thea kept going through his memory and slowly saw the man's life. This guy liked painting very much. But because of an accident, his head was hit and he became color-blind. Only dark pigments could be recognized by his brain. Among all the colors, he only liked red. In the midst of his dire straits, he had a fortuitous encounter. The aftermath of the particle explosion hit him, and the memory after that was very vague. He only vaguely remembered that before he fell, a can of red paint was spilled in his eyes. After that, the memory was even more chaotic. Thea could only look it up on the internet. This guy's emotional spectrum was too big for him after he woke up, and he talked nonsense. After several examinations, he was locked up as a mentally ill person. He was not released until recently when he regained his sanity. This guy was also careless. The first thing he did when he went out was to rob a bank. After that, he unscrupulously robbed a convenience store. He also blackened the Flash, who came out to practice long-distance running. This was what he did in just one day. What a rich and colorful life. Thea finished reading all the experiences, and like watching a movie, she also watched the process of him getting his power. Chapter 593. Compared to Thea, who had mastered 2 types of emotional spectrum, this guy's anger was not worth mentioning at all. Interestingly, what gave him his ability was not the emotional spectrum, but the dark matter that seeped into this world through the cracks of space during the Big Bang. After that, the dark matter and red pigment combined in some ingenious way, which gave him his superpower. Thea tried to communicate with his anger, but the communication was not smooth. On one hand, Thea did not have such emotions, and on the other hand, this guy's emotions were too few. As an ordinary person who had not undergone any special training, his capacity for emotional energy was very limited. This guy called the Rainbow Bandit could control ordinary people for at most 5 minutes, and the effect was even worse against people with strong willpower. Being able to turn the Flash into a dark person was the peak of his ability. Of course, the premise was that the Flash was dumped by heirs and had a tendency to turn into a dark person. Compared to Thea, the middle-aged man's emotions were like a drop of water compared to the sea. Thea tried twice and ended in failure. She was afraid that if she used a little more force, she would suck away all his emotions. What should she do? Using an individual to carry the emotions of anger, the mind of an ordinary person was too small in front of this kind of willpower. Thea lowered her head and pondered for a long time before she came up with a solution that was not really a solution. Strengthen this guy's ability and increase the speed at which he could absorb emotions. After sealing off the middle-aged man's consciousness, Thea directly teleported back to her underground laboratory in the metropolis. She ordered her subordinates to collect all kinds of red substances, pigments, blood, minerals, as long as it was related to red. Thea experimented with them one by one and finally found that the absorption and transformation effect of red pigment was the best for this guy. She ordered her subordinates to soak this guy in the pigment pool on time every day. Thea also considered the possibility of this guy's strength increasing and killing his way out. In theory, the magic seal could suppress his own will for 10 years. In order to prevent accidents, such as him suddenly giving birth to a new personality, Thea also set up a trigger alarm in the darkroom. As long as there was an accident here, she would know. The middle-aged man's anger was at the level of the Red Lantern Corps at most. This level of strength was no longer in her eyes. When she returned to Central City again, Oliver had not returned yet. After chatting with Moira for a while, Thea went back to her room to sleep. The entire campaign team stayed in Central City for 3 days. They visited the city council, the police station, and the school one by one. Other than the hospital, which still did not welcome the young lady, everything else was considered harmonious. The team did not stay for too long and went on to fight in major cities. Moira's reputation began to rise under the influence of several parties. This warm atmosphere ushered in a big explosion in Star City. Regardless of whether it was true or not, at least the citizens showed a look of gratitude. Moira excitedly shook hands with every supporter, and the campaign team felt proud. The young miss was also excited for her mother's honor. No one would believe that these citizens were all spontaneously thanking her from the bottom of their hearts. However, Thea didn't mobilize so many people. Star City's largest central square and 2 nearby streets were completely jammed. A conservative estimate was that out of the tens of millions of citizens, at least 1 million had come to the scene. Excluding those who had received benefits, there were still 700,000 to 800,000 people left. This meant that Moira had been in power in Star City for 8 years and had gained the recognition of the citizens. Thea was very proud of her mother. Star City was Moira's base, and the remaining candidates did not have the courage to give speeches here. Moira, on the other hand, had a good time in her own territory and received a lot of praise before continuing her journey. 10 days later in Gotham, Moira's journey was already more than half done. Several major polling organizations were optimistic that she would be elected. If there was no explosive news, her chances of being elected were very high. In the face of the future owner of the White House, many of Gotham's business and political elites had to give face. For example, Batman appeared in the election under the alias of Bruce Wayne. He had always maintained a limited cooperation with the U.S. government and the military, and even the Heaven's Eye Society. Now that Moira was about to enter the White House, he had an unspeakable awkwardness. In the past presidents, he had always used intimidation as his main tactic. He would pull the power switch for the president at the drop of a hat, stand at the window, and pretend to be mysterious. Otherwise, he would put important information in a bat dart and throw it on the president's desk or chair. This was not the case now. This was Thea and Oliver's mother, and behind these 2 siblings, there were a lot of heroes such as Wonder Woman, the Flash, and Black Canary. If Batman did not want the hero faction to be split into 2, he had to maintain respect. He had to restrain his arrogance. To be honest, this change in role made Batman a little uncomfortable. He advocated cooperation with the government, but Thea and the others were too close to the government, which was not in line with his intentions. However, he had no choice. No matter how powerful his dark technology was, he could not stop the election. He could only silently watch the situation slide into a situation that he did not like. "You've been nervous since 3 minutes ago. What's wrong?" Bruce stood beside Thea and asked in a low voice as his lips moved slightly. Thea was also very puzzled. 3 minutes ago, she felt an indescribable pressure. It did not seem like a sign of an impending crisis, but the divine position or source was reminding her of something. "It seems that something is going to happen. This is the first time I have such a premonition." "Is it about your mother?" Thea sensed it with her heart and shook her head with certainty. "No. Is it about Diana?" This time, Thea sensed it more carefully and finally shook her head. "Definitely not. That's strange. What exactly are you feeling?" Batman was confused by her words. He was very annoyed by this kind of thing that was out of his control. Unfortunately, it was always a big thing. Thea rubbed her head, and her blonde hair looked like a bird's nest. However, with her explosive charm, there was a hint of decadent beauty, which attracted the attention of the people around her. However, she was so frustrated that she did not have the time to think about her image. It was like a huge rock was pressing down on her heart. She could not answer Batman's question, but she suddenly felt a heavy psychological pressure. For a moment, she even thought that Darkseid had come to kill them, but she soon realized that it was just wishful thinking. The sonic tunnel was not activated, and no matter how powerful Uncle Doe was, he would not be able to come here. What was going on? If it was not Uncle Doe, could it be something in space? Thea did not think so. Other than supernatural beings like Lantern No. 1 and Black Lantern, she was confident that she could deal with everything else. Then there was only one answer: the problem was on Earth. Leaving a clone behind to cover the scene, Thea flew out of the atmosphere. With her supervision and artificial intelligence, she searched for an emergency on Earth. Metropolis, Gotham, Central City, Star City, and several other cities that were prone to accidents were searched, but there was no result. She even looked into the depths of Africa, in the rainforests of Brazil, in case there were cultists looking for trouble. Unfortunately, it was still useless. Everyone on Earth seemed to be living orderly lives. Occasionally, there would be a few bank robbers, but she could not see them causing much harm to Earth. Just as she was about to search for a second time, Gideon sent a message. Someone saw a tsunami forming at the south pier of the Central City waterfront. Central City again? Thea was speechless. How can we continue living like this? Chapter 594. Before the birth of the Flash, the broken Central City was a peaceful place. The citizens lived and worked in peace, and everyone was busy with their own things. Now things were happening all the time, and every time something happened it was a big deal. They listened to the wind and thunder in silence. According to Gideon's guidance, Thea finally found the culprit that made her feel uneasy, Barry Allen. The seawater around the Central City was rising rapidly, forming waves that were dozens of meters high. They were rushing towards the city. It was as if this guy had taken an aphrodisiac. He was running around the Central City at full speed, trying to create wind resistance to stop the waves. He ran faster and faster, and in a place where he couldn't see, Thea had seen signs of the time barrier breaking at any time. This guy had traveled through time after running wildly. Whether it was a day or two, Thea couldn't remember. She only knew that such a simple and violent travel through time was thousands of times more harmful to all intelligent life than the lives of the 6 million people in the Central City. Out of the corner of her eye, she also saw the culprit who was causing trouble in the center of the dock. He was similar to the cameo that the Flash defeated in the first battle. This guy also had the ability to control the weather, but he was better than the cameo because he had a name, the Weather Wizard. What Weather Wizard was, of course, nonsense. He was just a person with the ability to control local weather. The Flash was also retarded. Why didn't you just take him down directly? Why did you follow his big move? The culprit was down, and the remaining waves were uncontrolled. At most, they would destroy some buildings, and the death toll might not exceed the single digits. If he traveled through time, the damage would be immense, and the entire universe would be affected. Maybe an accident that didn't happen would cause 2 planets to go to war directly. Maybe an office worker would have a traffic accident because he was late for work. Or maybe an evil scientist would have a sudden inspiration and come up with something to destroy the world. All kinds of accidents would happen. The variability of time, even the most powerful computer and the greatest god couldn't predict and estimate it. It was too heavy. Thea herself would not be affected. Diana had merged with the source. Although the source was still slowly growing, it would not be affected. It was hard to say for others. Would Louise in the Metropolis miscarry because of a small accident, and end up with 2 lives, and then Superman would become evil? There was a chance of that happening. She did not know if anything would happen to Gotham's Batman, Damian, or even Moira and Oliver. Thea would never allow such a thing to happen. Barry's current speed was too fast. He had already surpassed Thea. She could only absorb energy from the weave and set up a one-time barrier in front of Barry. Time Stop was the name that the mages gave to this spell. It was a little arrogant, but its principle was actually to change the flow of time in the target area. It was a far cry from the real Time Stop. Thea changed the spell slightly. With the help of the huge amount of magic and divine power, the effect of her spell would be dozens of times stronger than that of the ancient mages. Barry, who was running with his head down, suddenly rushed into her time enchantment. The difference between the normal flow rate and the enchantment's flow rate made him recover from his unconscious running. Looking at the seawater outside the enchantment, the citizens' faces were filled with panic, and their bodies were almost frozen. It was as if the whole world had stopped moving. Before he could figure out what happened, he saw Thea standing in front of him with a serious face. "Mr. Barry Allen, do you know what you are doing?" To be honest, after knowing each other for so long, this was the first time that Mr. Barry saw Thea speak with a serious face. As the saying goes, a person with a good temper looks scary when they are angry. Miss Thea's current state was similar to that. However, the Flash also had his own persistence. He would not back down because of a casual sentence. "I am saving Central City." Hearing his neither servile nor overbearing words, Thea was so angry that she laughed. Perhaps the sneer on her face made Barry uncomfortable, and his tone became serious. "Is it funny? I don't blame you if you don't want to care. Central City is my home. I have to protect this place." He looked around again and felt that the seawater seemed to have risen a little. The citizens' limbs also moved slightly. "Where is this place? Let me out." This is a relatively static time buffer. If you use your ability to read 800 pages of papers in an instant, you can also achieve a similar effect. In Thea's impression, Superman and the Flash could chat in a world where the people around them were relatively static. They were different paths leading to the same goal. When a certain power reached its peak, it would almost have a similar ability. You keep saying that you are protecting the city. Why don't you just take down the psychic? Thea asked, a little puzzled. Barry looked left and right, but he could not see the mystery of this place. Time was static. Time was relatively static. He had not touched on these concepts yet, so he could not understand them. Now that he heard Thea's question, he asked, "What about the seawater? Have you thought about how big of an impact the whole city would have? Have you thought about how many people would have died?" Thea was silent. This was the difference between her and a proper superhero. They would save every life. Although Thea would also save people, she did not have the belief to save everyone. In the case of sacrificing one person to save 100 people, if it did not involve her own family, she would choose to sacrifice that person. If her own family was that person, she would kill the 100 people to save her own family. Like Superman, the Flash, and Captain America next door, they would choose to save everyone, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. This kind of moral character could be called great. It would only be seen as a movie or a comic book. But when working with this group of people in reality, there would be a serious conflict of ideas. Thea stood in the future and looked at the Flash's actions. She would think that he was very unwise, but in Barry's opinion, this was his only choice. "Mr. Barry Allen, I need to remind you that I'm afraid you don't know what you are doing. If you continue to run at the speed you just ran, you will pierce a big hole in the barrier of time. This kinetic energy is too big to be calculated with human units of measurement. Do you know the consequences of this? A hole in the barrier of time? What was that?" He vaguely had some guesses, but he was not very sure. After all, he just wanted to run out of the wind wall. He did not intend to pierce a hole in the barrier of time. But when he saw Thea rushing over without even changing her clothes, he could not help but ask, "What consequences?" "You can travel through time. Central City will definitely be saved because of the bearded guy in the long windbreaker over there." Thea pointed to the weather wizard who was still summoning the wind and rain in the distance. "He will definitely be caught by you. This means that the tsunami in Central City did not exist at the time you passed through." Chapter 595. It was a good thing to be able to avert a disaster, right? Barry thought to himself. As long as it didn't involve heirs, his IQ was still working. Thea must have other reasons for stopping him so fiercely. He immediately calmed down and waited for her to continue. "But what is the price, Barry? Can you bear the consequences of this?" "As long as I can save people, I will not regret it," Barry said firmly. He thought that the price would be something like damage to his body. Thea didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You don't know anything and you don't regret it? I haven't finished yet, right? You might as well change your name to Barry Boohooey." Thea stretched out a finger and pointed at the almost stagnant world outside. "You will change everything in front of you and everything in the universe. Can you bear this price?" Looking at Barry's confused face, Thea knew that he didn't understand. She continued to give examples. "Every one of us, forget it. I will put aside the intelligent life in the universe and focus on Earth. Mr. Barry, 7 billion people make choices every minute and every second. If you reset the timeline, whether it is a day, a year, or even a minute, they will have countless new choices. When they stand at the crossroads of life again, this choice can be very good. Or it can be worse than today's outcome. Can you bear this price?" Barry wanted to open his mouth and say that he could, but he really couldn't. He had no right to make choices for others. In order to deepen his understanding of the situation, Thea waved her hand and produced another image. In the image, Blackie and Barry were hugging and kissing. Thea pretended to have a sudden realization. "Oh, you finally took down heirs 10 seconds ago? It seems that you have finally seen your true colors in the face of life and death. Congratulations. Have you thought about it? If you reset the timeline, heirs will still return to Officer Eddie. Can you bear this price? Heirs loves me. I am very sure of this." Barry couldn't interfere in other people's lives, but he felt quite confident in his own affairs. "People have subconscious minds. I admit that Miss Iris loves you very much. Of course you love her too. But the love between the two of you 10 seconds ago was a moment of crisis. If this crisis hadn't happened, a lot of moral values, human factors, environmental pressure, and work atmosphere would have affected her final judgment. Based on my judgment of Iris, she will continue to cohabit with Officer Eddie and ignore her own subconscious reminders. Mr. Barry, this is just a small example. You may have the spirit of sacrifice, but what about the others? What about the 7 billion humans on Earth? If they had to make countless choices, would it be better or worse than today? Have you thought about this? Thea felt that this was a rare opportunity. She had to make things clear to him. Otherwise, it would be terrible if another Flashpoint incident happened. She had only heard of Dr. Manhattan using the Flashpoint to steal 10 years of time, but she had never seen it. In Thea's opinion, she couldn't care less about the affairs of those powerful people. She had to kill the ones in front of her. If she threaded the timeline like a sieve, she wouldn't be able to live. In order to strengthen Barry's confidence, she made another promise. I will deal with this tsunami. You can catch the culprit. Is that okay? Seeing this, Sia immediately put away the time enchantment and watched him rush towards the weather wizard like a wisp of smoke. Facing the waves that were dozens of meters high, Thea was not afraid. This thing looked scary, but its actual energy was not high. The battle between Superman and Zod, the battle between the three girls in Doomsday at that time, the damage caused by a casual punch or kick was greater than this turbulent wave. This kind of wave caused by the weather did not have a strong impact on the ground. Thea took out the God of Death's staff. This was an artifact created by the first king of Atlantis. Like the Sea King's trident, it also had the ability to control water. She called the Sea King couple and communicated with them. Both sides exerted their strength at the same time. The waves that were originally covering the sky were completely suppressed, and the water surface was as flat as a mirror. As for the tornado caused by the weather wizard, in the eyes of a real mage, it was like Li Kuei had met Li Gui. Thea easily extinguished it. After solving the disaster, she had the time to look at Barry. She didn't pay much attention before, but now she saw that Barry's speed was even faster. Previously, all of his speed was sucked away by the man in the leather jacket, and he had to cultivate again. Then he became evil again. Now Barry seemed to have leveled up twice. At this time his top speed had reached 5,000 kilometers per hour, surpassing Thea and Diana. In her opinion, he should be about the same as Supergirl, but not as good as Superman and the Martian Manhunter. She had been busy for 7 or 8 years, and now her single attribute was surpassed by someone else in 2 months. Thea was still a little depressed. Fortunately, speed was not her forte, and the feeling of unhappiness faded quickly. Barry's movements became faster and faster. The weather wizard, who had been standing in the middle of the dock, was tied up like a dumpling before he could see what was going on. Seeing that Thea had stopped the disaster, Barry happily saved his adoptive father, his future father-in-law, Joe West. Thinking that heirs could finally be with him, he felt full of energy. As for Officer Eddie Swan, he could only say sorry. Just when Barry felt that he was going to reach the peak of his life, the call in his headset made him fall into the abyss. The truth was revealed. Dr. Wells was Reverse Lightning. He had wanted to kill Psyker, who had found out the truth, but his tracks were exposed and he was stopped by Caitlin in time. Reverse Lightning did not know that Caitlin was so powerful. The Frost Killer with full firepower, or rather full of ice power, saved Psyker in the nick of time. Caitlin could not catch up with Reverse Lightning's speed, but she only defended and did not attack. Using a large area of effect attack, Reverse Lightning used himself as the starting point and constantly absorbed the heat around him. No matter which angle he attacked from, he could not avoid this 360-degree attack without any blind spots. As long as he was within a certain range of Caitlin, the heat in his body would begin to disappear rapidly. It was like a mouse trying to pull a turtle. Caitlin tried to throw lightning twice, but unfortunately, after becoming Thea's follower, she would also receive some combat training from Death Knell and Fiora from time to time. She could not compare to the experienced mercenaries, but she was definitely not a rookie who would go weak at the sight of battle. The initial speed of the lightning was very fast, but unfortunately, lightning also had heat, and it would be affected by Caitlin's absorption of heat. The loss of heat naturally decreased the speed. Under the premise that she was prepared, it was not too difficult to dodge. Caitlin, I have underestimated you. Reverse Lightning took off his mask, revealing the elegant and wise face of Dr. Wells. Caitlin, who had been with Thea for a long time, had excellent acting skills. "Doctor, why did you kill Psyker, and what are you wearing? Are you the one who killed Barry's mother? Why? Why did you do that?" Chapter 596. Psyker looked at his mentor in confusion. Caitlin already knew the truth, but he didn't. Just 2 minutes ago, he had treated Dr. Wells as a teacher, as a father. Now that this father wanted to kill him, he felt cold heartache and all sorts of emotions. At this time, he also looked at Reverse Lightning anxiously, waiting for him to give them an answer. "Why would I do that?" "Good question. You are both my best students, Caitlin." Psyker. "Psyker, I look at you like I'm looking at my son." Reverse Lightning looked around with some emotion. Although Caitlin was frozen like an ice house, he could still see the structure of the buildings. "This is my home. You and Barry are like my family. The time I spent with you was the happiest time of my life." "Then why did you do that? Why?" Psyker roared with blood at the corner of his mouth. He couldn't understand why the respected Dr. Wells would kill Barry's mother. The two of them had nothing to do with each other. Reverse Lightning's skinny face had a slight change. It was very subtle. If you didn't look closely, you would think it was an illusion. He was about to say something when he suddenly noticed something. He put on a cynical smile again. "Barry is back. He should be able to answer your questions. I look forward to our next meeting." After he finished, he turned into a red lightning and left. As soon as he left, Barry turned into a yellow lightning and rushed back to the lab. Seeing that the two of them were fine, he didn't bother to explain and chased after them. The two lightning bolts started an intense chase in Central City. Barry leveled up twice and Reverse Lightning also benefited from it. His speed was faster and more agile. Unlike Barry, his experience was unparalleled. He was also very familiar with the terrain. This chase was like a simulation in his mind countless times. Thea didn't participate in this race. Barry was still very young, so it wasn't a bad thing to accept some setbacks. Besides, Thea really couldn't catch up. Of course, she found many excuses for herself. She said that the grass was too soft and too hard, the weather was too cold and too hot, she didn't have her own sportswear and so on. After giving Psyker a simple treatment, Lin Sanji realized that this silly boy had suffered quite a serious injury this time. The physical damage was still manageable, but the psychological damage could only be healed by himself. She asked about what had happened, and Psyker told her everything with a blank expression. The situation wasn't complicated at all. Reverse Lightning was truly frightened by the mess of adepts in Central City. He wasn't afraid of them, but he was afraid that one day, Barry wouldn't be able to hold on and die. If that happened, it would be too late for regrets. However, Barry was the kind of person who would die if he didn't help others. Reverse Lightning, who was so worried, could only pressure him in another way. Intentionally exposing his tracks, Reverse Lightning personally went into action. The two of them chased each other around Central City, and the result was undoubtedly Barry's complete defeat. Knowing that he had many shortcomings, Barry sought help from Dr. Whale's sock puppet account. He cried and shouted, "Coach, I want to play basketball." Reverse Lightning naturally did as he wished. Barry reduced his crime-fighting activities and focused on long-distance running with the coach. At the same time, in order to remove his sock puppet account from the list of suspects, Reverse Lightning set up another ruse. At that time, the effect was quite good. Barry clenched his teeth and calmed down for a few days, but loopholes were unavoidable. Finally, Psyker found them today. 1,000 miles of dike was destroyed by an ant's nest. A single mistake caused his entire plan to collapse. Thea sighed when she heard this. Putting aside the fact that Reverse Lightning killed Barry's mother, he really treated Barry and Psyker very well. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he taught him everything he knew. Now the three of them had turned against each other. The cutting-edge technology laboratory could no longer be restored to its former glory. It was a pity. Not long after, Barry ran back with his face covered in dirt. Even a blind person would know that he had lost his target. It was a wall. I saw him go straight through the wall. When I went around to look for him, he was already gone. The rookie Flash was very depressed. He thought that his speed was great, but he was taught a lesson by Reverse Lightning. He didn't know how to go through walls. When he gradually calmed down, the few of them began to exchange information. Psyker knew that reverse lightning was a transmigrator, and Barry knew why he was exposed. For a moment, the two of them were silent. That means he came from the future. He trained you to go back to the original time and space? And Barry, you had the chance to transmigrate tonight, but Thea stopped you? Psyker sorted out the relationship and finally felt that the fog in front of him wasn't as dense as before. Then why did he kill my mother? Reverse lightning's various abnormalities were explained, but Barry still couldn't figure out why he killed his mother. Psyker was also puzzled by this question. Thea didn't participate in the discussion. Her vision was getting more and more profound. Sometimes she couldn't help but think, was Barry's mother really such a person? Could she be the incarnation of the seraphic speed space? Did she come to Earth specifically to give birth to Barry? Or did she create an incarnation or simply possess an ordinary person's body? Otherwise, it really couldn't explain the close connection between Barry and the seraphic speed space. He was too special. If he was the biological son of the seraphic speed space, then everything could be explained. Like what was said before, it wasn't a coincidence that lightning struck him, but lightning chose him. This was fate. As for the reproductive isolation, it wasn't a problem at all. The Kryptonians could have children with Earth, the three palace magicians could have children with Earth, and Darkseid could have children with the ancient Earthlings and the current Amazons. There was no reason why the seraphic speed space couldn't. Although the genes of the Earthlings were weak, they were extremely tolerant. Thea felt that this was the most reasonable explanation. Barry's mother wasn't dead at all. She was just using reverse lightning to complete her mission. However, she didn't say such ridiculous words. Barry was still far from the seraphic speed space. She would let him find out the truth himself. What's your plan after this? Thea felt that there was nothing for her to do here. She still had to go back to be the mascot of the election. I want to catch him and ask him why he killed my mother. I also want to find evidence to clear my father's name. Barry had always been the deputy leader of the team. Now that the leader had run away, he had to make the decision. Do you need my help with your father's matter? Thea wasn't bragging. She didn't need magic or any means. With her current influence, the so-called justice could be done with just a word. It might be a little difficult to release him directly, but it wouldn't be a problem to get him out on medical parole. This simple sentence stumped Barry. He wasn't deaf or blind. He knew what Thea meant, but this was the main reason why he hesitated. Chapter 597. With his speed, saving his father from prison was as easy as buying a pizza, but he didn't want to use such a dishonorable method to get his father out of prison. Now that Thea had provided him with another method, although he knew that it wasn't fair, at least his father would be able to walk in front of people without having to hide all day. Barry, who had always valued relationships, was in a dilemma. Should he stick to justice or reunite with his father? Thea nodded. This kid had integrity. She just had to make a few calls and get him out. It was really easy to control the underworld and get someone out of prison. This matter would be done quietly, and Thea wouldn't be involved. Flash couldn't send his father back to prison when he saw him, right? He would most likely admit the truth when the time came. She was experienced in dealing with these arrogant heroes. Ignoring Barry's father, Thea still wanted to ask Reverse Lightning what their attitude was. What are your plans for Reverse Lightning? Caitlin continued to pretend to be invisible, while Psyker and Barry looked conflicted. First of all, kill? Impossible. Not to mention that they had been together for such a long time, they still had feelings for each other. Reverse Lightning couldn't kill them, so Barry and Cisco had to add the word, update. They couldn't let him go either. Barry felt that this was his responsibility. He had to catch Reverse Lightning. All right, I'll help you. Thea took out the Croydon compass and threw it to Barry. The Croydon compass. This is a magic tool. As long as you think of someone, the compass will automatically find the direction. It's safe and pollution-free. Ordinary people can use it. Thea explained how to use it. The two boys with high scientific knowledge seemed to have found a new toy. Cisco circled around Barry while Barry used the compass to correct the direction. The result was exactly the same. What's the theory behind this? Is it the effect of the magnet? Cisco, who was originally depressed, was attracted by the theory behind the compass. He became more energetic. Thea could only smile bitterly. Who the hell knew what was going on? This bunch of science-oriented people would try to use science to explain everything they encountered. The fat old man from Firestorm was like that, and so were Psyker and Barry here. Although she had lent them the compass, Thea was still not optimistic about Barry's ability to find reverse lightning. This was mainly because reverse lightning knew him too well. He had been silently observing a person for 15 years. Perhaps reverse lightning knew how much Barry talked in his sleep, and how many times he went to the toilet. The information was completely unequal. Chasing after him under this premise would only result in nothing. In fact, the best way to deal with reverse lightning was to let Madame Xanadu divine his location. After that, a few heroes would go together and find this person. Then, a large number of speed-limiting spells would be thrown out. With a wave of skills from the heroes, reverse lightning would definitely die. However, judging from Barry's intention, he still wanted to investigate it himself. Thea didn't really want to see Shangdo now, mainly because their relationship was too awkward. In the past, it was just a simple relationship between an old senior and a new junior. Since Old Ma and Xanadu rolled together, they had become a friendly senior and junior relationship. Illegitimate daughter and stepmother. The two who were originally unrelated had this strange connection because of Old Ma's involvement. How could such a chaotic situation be described with the word awkward? After saying goodbye to the three, Thea returned to Gotham and continued to act as Moira's election backdrop. Midway, she instructed her subordinates to use a roundabout relationship to release Barry's father. For the next few days, Barry was in a state of excitement. The breakthrough with heirs was not abandoned because of the timeline reset. His biological father was also rescued. At this time, Barry only felt that his life was full of happiness. Of course, the process was not smooth. Officer Eddie Swan, whose wife was stolen, was burning with jealousy and chased after Barry Allen. Knowing that he was in the wrong, he did not fight back and was solidly beaten up. Feeling all kinds of strange gazes around him, Officer Eddie Swan left the Central City Police Station and disappeared from everyone's sight. Lady Blackie finally confirmed her true love. She stuck to Barry every day. If it wasn't for the pursuit of reverse lightning, Barry felt that he would have forgotten his surname. He should have left the Central City. A few days later, Barry said to Thea on the phone. Thea could only maintain a limited amount of attention. To be honest, reverse lightning was not a traditional bad person. He had definitely killed people, whether it was Barry's mother or the original Dr. Wells. But to say that he was so bad that it was hard to remember, it was not so bad that it was hard to remember. From a certain point of view, because he led the birth of the Flash earlier, the technological level of human society had improved by a few years. For example, Psyker, who had been learning from him for many years, had received a lot of cutting-edge knowledge of future technology. His vision and perspective had greatly improved. In short, reverse lightning was definitely at fault, but his achievements should not be ignored. Thea's attitude towards him was to let him be. There were countless people on Earth who were worse than him. It did not matter if there was one more or one less. She was just the goddess of trade and wealth, not the goddess of law and justice. She would leave Barry to worry about reverse lightning. Moira's trip to the country won a lot of praise. Some of the media sincerely praised her, while some received benefits. There were some who praised her and some who criticized her. Thea deliberately allowed some of the media to smear her family. Under the current democratic system, let alone Moira, even if Jehovah were to be the president, there would be people who would scold and praise him. This was the main theme, which was very American. Under this system, it was impossible for people to praise him and shout, "Long live the Emperor." A few bold media outlets attacked Thea and other superheroes, while the timid ones began to use Oliver's gossip to hype things up. The writers of the media began to work hard. Like writing a novel, they wrote about Oliver's life experience before the shipwreck. 10,000 words a day, they wrote continuously for more than half a month. In Oliver's legend, the number of his female protagonists had exceeded the 30 mark. Every day, there were young girls who contacted the newspaper websites to introduce their stories with Oliver. Some of them were unscrupulous in order to become famous, while some were true. At least, Thea's investigation showed that among the 30 women, at least 22 had slept with Oliver. Many women described their experiences with Oliver vividly. They described the length, the depth, the position, the things they liked to say, and so on. This information was published by many unscrupulous media outlets. As a direct result, Shadow applied for annual leave to return to Purgatory Island to accompany her father. Even a gentle woman like her couldn't stand Oliver's past misdeeds. One could only imagine how much information the media had dug up. Chapter 598. Oliver, who had already turned over a new leaf, naturally could not watch his wife go back to her parents' home without doing anything. At the same time, he could also avoid the crazy media. He also prepared to go to Purgatory Island to avoid the limelight. The gossip was getting more and more widespread. Soon, someone dug up the story of Laurel Lance and Sarah Lance fighting for a man. If they were separated from each other and did not see each other, it would be easy. However, they saw each other every day, which was very awkward. Seeing that Oliver was going back to Purgatory Island to fish, Laurel and Tommy also planned to take a break for a few days. Old Ma had left all the overseas assets in real estate except for the Merlin Group to Tommy. This guy was also a hidden rich man. There were even a few small islands under his name. The two of them found a small island and prepared to go on vacation. At the same time, they could also avoid the troubles in America. The few of them had an awkward meeting and immediately decided that the Green Arrow team would stop work for a month. Before he left, Oliver handed the safety of Star City over to his sister. Moira's side had come to an end for the time being. The rest did not need Thea's help. She also took it as a vacation and prepared to stay in Star City for a few days. The young lady, who had returned to the novice village, was very comfortable. The four main generals of the Green Arrow team had gone on a journey together. The remaining Sarah Lance and Shadow El Ghul had come out to take refuge because of Talia's tyranny. They were more like external aides, not team members. Then the only one left was Roy Harper, who was now codenamed Arsenal. Facing the young lady now, Roy, the lover of Thea 1-0, was still very nervous. Thea simply gave them a collective vacation. With her personally overseeing things, nothing would happen in Star City. This period of time was a rare buffer period. The leather jacket man and the angry middle-aged man that she had harvested a while ago directly entered her new research range. Of the two, one could absorb Barry's energy and even all kinds of energy, while the other had anger in the emotional spectrum. The clone immediately failed. The angry middle-aged man could be cloned, but the emotional spectrum couldn't. The middle-aged man's clone didn't have any emotional power at all. No matter how scientific methods were used to recreate the scene of that day, or using spirit force to trigger the angry emotions, none of them succeeded. Thea had no choice but to slowly absorb the anger from the middle-aged man's body. Unlike fear and pity, she did not need to use her mind to experience anger. She was already a god, and with her own divine power, she could forcibly control anger. Of course, the downside was equally huge. His anger towards Thea was like a rootless tree. If he used it, it would be gone. If he used it again, he would have to find a middle-aged man to absorb it. Every now and then, she would take a breath and watch the anger in her spiritual world grow from the size of a strand of hair to the size of a finger. This process would be very slow, but it would accumulate. When she could control the anger as much as a lamp ring, she would have completely mastered the emotion of anger. The research of the man in the leather jacket had reached a stalemate. There was nothing wrong with this guy's clone. It was just that the upper limit of his absorption was fixed. This was determined by genes. Unless Thea resurrected the man in the leather jacket and raised him by 2 levels, the clone would always be at his level when he was alive. Whether this ability was strong or not, Thea would say it was very strong. It was just that the man in the leather jacket was congenitally deficient. Thea had tried many ways, but she couldn't increase the limit of the clone at all. The idea of creating an army of hundreds and thousands of clones floated in Thea's mind, but she immediately rejected it. 1 or 2 clones could remove their brain functions at the embryonic stage, but it couldn't be done if there were too many of them. Moral factors needed to be considered, and those invisible causes and effects also needed to be paid attention to. Mortals were afraid of fruit and bodhisattvas were afraid of causes. The more Thea knew now, the more careful she would be when doing things. She directly sealed the body of the man in the leather jacket. Thea was about to leave the laboratory when she saw the secretary come in. Facing the many unknown bloodstains in the laboratory, Miss Maisie wasn't surprised at all. It was just that she had seen the same scene too often by Luther's side. Although the new boss's orientation was a bit of a criticism, The previous boss's orientation was also very problematic. In the dead of the night, the secretary couldn't help but wonder if these geniuses were all sick. "What's the matter, Miss Maisie?" "Yes, boss. 3 minutes ago, someone took control of the Star City TV station. It's now live broadcasting." The secretary then handed Thea a tablet. She summoned a ball of water to wash her hands. After drinking some water, she took the tablet and looked at it. In the picture was a young woman, but her taste in clothes was very poor. She had light yellow hair and was wearing an orange jacket. Coupled with the big round black-rimmed glasses on her face, she looked very stupid. The woman, who didn't know that she was called stupid, was dancing with excitement. She shouted at the camera, "Quinn Group's idiots, you rejected the greatest invention in the world. You and your superhero boss are all idiots." Thea, who was drinking water, spat it out. It wasn't because she was scolded, but because she heard this woman's words. Was she related to her own group? She thought it was Star City's trouble, but she didn't expect that the other party's target seemed to be her. Without looking at the crazy woman on the screen, Thea asked the secretary, "Who is this guy?" The secretary was chosen by Luther. She was really capable. Now that she had the green light lamp ring, it was very easy for her to investigate anything. She had already collected the information. When she heard Thea's question, she directly answered, "This woman is called Brie Lavin. She graduated from the University of Chicago with a degree in biomechanical engineering. She came to work at Quinn Group 3 years ago. She was a very smart and creative roboticist. She had once developed micro-robotic bees for agricultural use, but her pace was getting faster and faster. Before she was about to weaponize bees, Dr. Hoffman thought that her research was very dangerous and fired her." The secretary said with a calm face. Thea frowned slightly. She had a little impression of this woman. She seemed to be a very good scientist. But how could she be her employee? Shouldn't she be from Central City? She remembered that the Flash was almost stung to death by her mechanical bee. Thea was too lazy to think about it. It was not a big deal. Just deal with it. She teleported to the TV station with the secretary. The police and the guards of Quinn Group had already arrived at the scene, but the studio was firmly controlled by her bees. No one could use heavy weapons, so the situation was a bit of a stalemate for a while. Everyone was already used to her popping out of nowhere. "Dr. Quinn, what do you think about this?" the TV station owner said to her with a bitter face. "Mr. Pearl, please rest assured that I will deal with it. I will be responsible for all the losses of the TV station. You can send the list of losses to my secretary later." Chapter 599. After saying that, Sia sent the TV station owner to the side. Facing the dense swarm of bees, she was also a little scared. This was not to say that bees were scary, but it was instinctive to stay away from them. Looking at the bees all over the broadcast room, the floor, the ceiling, all kinds of wires, and all kinds of utility rooms, the constant buzzing made the secretary, who could defeat dozens of American soldiers with her bare hands, a little pale. She carefully looked at Thea's face and observed her expression for a while. She thought she understood the boss's plan. She waved her hand, and dozens of Quinn Group security personnel began to clear the area. "Use electromagnetic weapons." Thea glanced at the bees and ordered happily. The security personnel did not know that these bees were actually mechanical creatures. Although they were puzzled, they still changed their weapons. A person who looked like a captain threw an electromagnetic pulse bomb at the swarm of bees. An invisible wave swept across, and the bees fell to the ground. Thea suppressed her disgust and ordered everyone to attack. The following battle was boring. Without the bees, the woman was just an ordinary person. She was sent to the Star City police station by the security personnel. Thea asked Gideon to download all her experimental data. It seemed feasible to combine a large number of bees with the Jacket Man's cells. The surface of the mechanical bees was covered with bionic skin containing the Jacket Man's cells. In this way, the problem of limited energy absorption would be solved, and the moral problem would also be solved. Imagine a wave of bees when facing an enemy, and the enemy's mana would be depleted. What a magnificent scene that would be. However, Thea was a little allergic to bees, so she did not want to use this trick. She asked Gideon to work on the combination of the two. Thea did not use it herself, but others could use it. She was going to ask which fierce woman was not afraid of bees and teach her this trick. After staying in Star City for a week and defeating 2 gangs, Milady's current strength was like using an atomic bomb to kill chickens. Olivier went fishing, Tommy went swimming, Superman stayed at home with his wife, and the Flash and heirs were intimate every day. Since they all went on strike, Thea felt that she could not treat herself badly. She didn't have any conscience to blame her at all. She left an incarnation in Star City to put on an act and took Diana to travel with her in the name of improving her state of mind. Diana agreed wholeheartedly. Traveling was a good thing. She set 3 rules with her. No magic, no magic, no magic. The 2 of them had been busy for the past few years and rarely had time to relax. Thea needs to slowly adapt to her new identity, and Diana needs to grow up. Thea tells the secretary not to call her if there is nothing important, and takes Diana out for a stroll. The 2 of them carried a large backpack, a water bottle, a sun hat, outdoor equipment, and hiking shoes like ordinary people and began their pleasant journey. At first, Thea didn't think it was necessary to bring these things, but Diana insisted, so she could only agree. Thea can survive in the wild, but her ability is based on the convenience and speed of magic. Now Diana asks her not to use magic, and to experience the hardships of ordinary people. Thea is exhausted. Have we left the mountains? Thea asks Sister Di with a gloomy face. The 2 of them crossed the Rocky Mountains on foot. At first, they followed a group of people. The 2 of them were wearing scarves and sunglasses, so no one recognized them. Soon after they entered the mountains, the group of backpackers left, leaving only the 2 of them to climb the mountains. Diana's ability to survive in the wild was very strong. Whether it was the previous 100 years of living alone or the recent journey to find the source, she was worthy of being a powerful warrior. Diana repeatedly said that she could not use magic, so Thea could only follow her on the long journey. Fortunately, she had a divine body. Otherwise, how could she drag an ordinary woman to climb the mountains with her? She was exhausted. Unfortunately, they met a black bear before. Sister Di stopped her idea of using lightning to barbecue the bear, so the 2 of them fled in the forest like ordinary people. The silly black bear didn't know how lucky it was. It chased the 2 of them for nearly a day. In the end, maybe it was wondering why the 2 of them were so strong, or maybe it was just too tired. Anyway, Thea and Diana found that it was gone. The 2 of them breathed a sigh of relief. This bear was too persistent. Haha. Diana laughed as she clutched her stomach when she saw that Sia's face was as messy as a cat. What are you laughing about? You're not much better than me. Thea looked at Diana, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The Valkyrie also suppressed her strength. Otherwise, even 1,000 bears of that level would not be enough to kill them. In the process of being chased by the black bear, the long-legged goddess missed a step and fell into a ditch. Thea had to pull her out. The 2 of them looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. Thea touched Diana's face with her fingers. There was a lot of dust on the Valkyrie's face. Her skin was very elastic and had a texture like silk. Diana Prince, has anyone ever told you that you're too beautiful? It's my honor to meet you. Why are you suddenly so serious? Diana was a little stunned. Then she saw Thea's sincere eyes, and she was also infected. You're the real beauty. Even Aphrodite can't compare to you. My lover is the most beautiful goddess in the world. At this moment, words were no longer effective. Everything was explained by actions. The 2 women's lips were close together. Diana's lips were thick and dark, while Thea's lips were thin and light. Their lips and teeth were touching, and their tongues were gently stirring. Thea didn't expect Diana to be so passionate. She was a little unprepared and couldn't help but swallow lightly. Diana caught her slight movement and her tongue suddenly opened her mouth, wantonly enjoying the tip of the goddess of wealth's tongue. Woo! Thea was annoyed. This Diana's personality was too strong. She always wanted to take the initiative. She wanted to tell her that she wasn't someone to be trifled with. While Diana was in a daze, she directly opened up a second battlefield. Her hand was originally behind her head, but now it went down and brushed against her slender neck. Her hot breath blew on the tip of her nose and the side of her face. At the same time, Thea's eyes were also electrifying. Her watery eyes disintegrated Diana's consciousness of resistance. Thea took advantage of the victory and pressed her lips together. She grabbed Diana's hands and put them behind her back. Just as Diana felt that something was wrong, Thea freed up a hand and pressed her down. The two women's indescribable bodies were tightly pressed together. The goddess of wealth was above, and the guardian goddess was below. When their eyes met, Thea sucked her trembling lower lip, then her upper lip, and finally the tip of her tongue went in between her lips. It was a short, deep, and thorough kiss. Chapter 600. The two girls couldn't compare, but they knew each other very well. Thea looked weak, but she had a strong heart that ordinary people didn't know. Diana was the opposite. Under her valiant appearance she lacked love. In the exchange of body, spirit, and divinity, their attachment to each other was getting deeper and deeper. Diana was glad to have such a lover to accompany her forever. Thea also liked the Valkyrie to fill her inner world. The road ahead was too difficult, and it was too difficult to walk alone. Just like Batman's analysis on the note he gave to the Heaven's Eye Society, their weakness was each other. In the dead of night, there were roars of wild beasts in the forest, but neither of them took it seriously. Diana was in a good mood and didn't care about the promise that they couldn't use magic. Thea moved mountains and seas, pushed down a dense forest, and built a wooden house. The two of them chatted in the hot pool. "You seem to have become bigger here? Also softer? Is it because of the divine position?" Diana touched Thea's neck with a playful look. The young lady didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but she had to admit that Diana's observation was very meticulous. She noticed such a small difference, but she couldn't tell why. She could only attribute it to the self-development of her charm. "It's perfect." Diana, who had the essence of Greek aesthetics, couldn't resist this kind of beauty at all. She played with her like a toy for a long time. Diana's figure was also very good, but she was more inclined to be a warrior. Some parts of her body were not as beautiful as Thea's. "How dare you tease me?" Thea also didn't want to be outdone. Her hands began to touch her long legs and all the way up. This time the battle was more intense than before. Halfway through, Thea suddenly thought of finding a few pairs of silk stockings for Diana. Her long legs with black stockings really had a unique flavor. Diana also didn't let her go. Thea tried it on and the coffee color suited her. The two pairs of long legs intertwined together, and the atmosphere in the wooden house was so thick that it was like water that couldn't be dissolved. After a night of intense fighting, Diana sat up very early the next day. "My origin seems to have taken a big step forward." Valkyrie pulled up Thea, who was still pretending to be asleep. There was such a thing? This was the only thought left in Thea's mind. She used her heart to feel her own body. Her changes were not as obvious as Diana's. She only vaguely felt that she was more in tune with the universe. Of course, this was not caused by a night of lovemaking, but by some kind of change in the state of mind. The two of them immediately packed up and continued their journey. From the United States all the way south through Mexico into South America. As an American country, the difference between here and the north was like heaven and earth. Thea felt that the trade here was chaotic and disorderly. The distribution of wealth was even more unreasonable. Money was only in the hands of a few people. Naturally, the ordinary people did not need to trade. She even saw bartering in a certain area, which made her very unhappy. Diana didn't like this place either. Who was she supposed to protect? Protect the rich and powerful, or protect the equally cunning civilians? The two's journey lasted for more than half a month. Diana received a message from Hippolyte, asking her to return to Mount Olympus. Fearing that she would have an accident, Thea decided to go with her. The two women were teleported to Mount Olympus. At this time it had been 9 months since Thea left last time. The originally solemn and majestic mountain peak was shrouded in a murderous aura. Many Amazons were busy preparing. The time of the prophecy has come. The eldest son of Zeus is about to kill his brothers and sisters and ascend to his father's throne. Hera pointed to the people who were preparing for the battle and explained to the two women. Now she could no longer see through Thea's depth. Her attitude naturally changed again. She went from being optimistic to being an equal, even if she was a god king. This was the difference in strength. You should try to avoid fighting as much as possible, especially in the battle of gods. The priesthood of the old gods will affect your origin. Thea told Diana. The eldest son was praised as a god in the prophecy. She was afraid that Diana would rush up regardless of everything. Although the gods were unwilling, in the face of the summons of the god king, except for the rebellious Apollo and Hermes who had defected to Hades, several other gods who were still breathing also arrived one by one. A bunch of weaklings. Thea was not optimistic about the combat power of the gods of wine, fire, agriculture, and strife. They were good at eating, drinking, and playing, but fighting? They had to stand aside. The old acquaintance, Ares, was getting older and older. He stood there trembling. Many Amazons didn't understand why this bad guy in the past seemed like he could be blown away by a breath. Thea knew very well that although the weakening of the god of war had nothing to do with her directly, the indirect impact was too great. There was no war between humans. It was ironic that several big countries were forced into the fast lane by her interstellar plan. They were all desperately building mecha and motherships. A few gunpowder barrels, the Middle East, Afghanistan, and so on. Without a few big countries secretly playing games, why would they fight among themselves? All the wars subsided a month after the mothership was launched. The big countries had no energy to play games. They were all digging deep into their potential to occupy a leadership position in the future. The end of the war naturally affected Ares. 100 years ago, he pretended to be a cripple in front of Thea, Diana, and Steve. Now he didn't need to pretend. He was already crippled. He was a candle in the wind. In the next few days, the gods waited for the enemy to attack in Olympus. The fighting power of the god of wine was not worth mentioning, but the wine he brewed was simply the best in the world. Thea and he chatted well. She brought a lot of good wine and was going to let Moira, Oliver, and the others taste it. The god of fire had been helping the gods to build weapons. Thea discussed with him twice and he agreed to build a weapon for Diana. The godslayer that he had obtained from Paradise Island, Sia had jokingly called it the sword that Ares must die. This sword had already completed its historical mission. Ares did not need anyone else to do anything as he was about to die. Now it was just the right time to take it out and reforge it with Diana's Vulcan's sword. These two swords were built by the god of fire. Now that the two swords were back in his hands, he couldn't help but sigh. After asking Diana about her fighting habits, the two swords were returned to the furnace to be forged. 3 days later, a pair of blue swords was handed to Diana. 2 swords, this was her fighting style in the future. The combination of sword and shield was no longer suitable for Diana's increasing strength. Low-level enemies couldn't break her defense, so she didn't need the shield. High-level enemies couldn't defend her with the shield. Instead of being awkward, it was better to give up the shield and strengthen her attack power. With golden armor and a red cloak, and 2 long swords in her hands, Diana now looked more heroic. Thea had a different style. It was not suitable to wear the old gods' equipment in the territory of the new gods, but it was okay to wear the new gods' equipment in the territory of the old gods. At least, Hera and the others couldn't see the origin of Thea's divine robe. They just thought it was very mysterious. Chapter 601. Diana gave people the impression of a brave warrior, while Thea embodied the mystery of a spellcaster. The hood covered most of her face, and her beautiful chin, slightly opened lips, and the occasional strand of golden hair peeking out from the hood were filled with a tranquil aura. The gods waited for 10 days, and the enemies in the prophecy finally appeared. Mount Olympus, which was covered in starlight, seemed to have been hit by something, and a deep crater suddenly appeared on the empty ground. Countless evil creatures descended upon the land of the gods. The leader was a tall and strong man with a fierce face and an open chest full of scars. His hair and beard were like weeds, and his equipment was very simple, as if he had stripped off the skin of some animal and put it on his body. However, no one would underestimate this leather outfit. This was dragon skin, the skin of an adult black dragon. It was barbaric, coarse, and violent. Even from thousands of miles away, one could still feel the bone-deep hatred from this person. He hated this place, hated everyone here. He was a nameless god, the eldest son of Zeus and Hera. When he was born, he was abandoned by his biological parents because of the prophecy that he would sit on the throne of the gods. He grew up in the wilderness and fought with wolves during his childhood. When he became an adult, he tried to prove his worth to Mount Olympus, killing evil dragons and fighting everywhere. Unfortunately, his bravery was not valued. Instead, it aroused fear. Zeus personally took action and sealed him in the depths of the earth's core. With hatred for Mount Olympus and the whole world, He climbed with his bare hands for 6,000 years. After countless hardships, he finally saw the light of day again. He wanted revenge and to take back what belonged to him. He was the eldest son. The appearance of the evil creatures naturally attracted the attention of the gods. At this time, Thea was chatting with her new friend. It was Aramani, who had the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a spider. She had followed Thea out when Hera was wreaking havoc in the underworld. She was also at the level of a demigod, and was one of the few important combat forces under Hera's command. Thea happened to pass by and saw her spinning silk at the same time, which attracted her interest. After that, they started chatting casually. Even though Thea was now in the camp of the Greek gods, she still felt that these gods were quite f***ed up. Back when Aramani was immortal, she was the wife of a king. Her hobby was weaving, which was completely harmless to humans and animals. Not only that, it also had a very positive effect on ordinary women. Men would farm and go to war, while women would weave. Logically speaking, such a harmonious and positive scene should be a good thing. Unfortunately, the goddess Athena heard of her good weaving skills, and Athena, who had nothing better to do, personally descended to the mortal world to compete with her. Naturally, ordinary people couldn't compare to the gods who had cheats, and Aramani couldn't take it anymore and committed suicide. If things stopped here, it would already be too much, but the worst was yet to come. For some unknown reason, Athena captured her soul and reincarnated her into a half-human, half-spider. How could such a vile thing be described with the word f***ck? Do whatever you want, submit to me and prosper, oppose me and perish. Even if you die, you have to carry shame with you. This was the thinking of the gods at that time. After listening to the outrageous story, Thea couldn't help but look askance. Others were afraid of Athena, but she didn't have to. Athena wouldn't send a group of Saint Seias to push her, so what was there to be afraid of? She stood in Aramani's position and scolded Athena. Only then did the Spider-Woman and her have a little friendship. Over the next few days, Thea chatted with her every now and then. The two of them could barely be considered friends, and Thea made her request. She wanted to use her divine spider silk to weave stockings. She wanted a variety of colors so that she could spar with the long-legged goddess in the future. Ordinary people's stockings were too easy to wear and tear. Only quasi-divine items could match them. The Spider-Woman, who didn't understand her evil intentions, was puzzled. What was the purpose of weaving stockings with spider silk that was as thin as a cicada's wing? Was it for defense or to increase one's speed? Although she couldn't figure out the purpose, Aramani, who could spit spider silk and had max-level tailoring skills, made a few pairs of stockings according to her request even though she had turned into a spider. Aramani, who felt like she had found a treasure, returned the favor and helped the Spider-Woman check it. Athena's technique wasn't brilliant. Originally, Thea could have helped her return to her original form, but unfortunately, her spider form had been completely fixed during the process of her returning from the underworld to the world of the living. Even with Thea's ability, she couldn't change this situation. She could only take a step back and cast a permanent human transformation spell on the Spider-Woman. This spell allowed her to maintain her human form for 4 hours a day. This simple effort gained the Spider-Woman strong goodwill. In the end, Thea received a large number of silk products and said that if she needed more, she would have more in the future. When the firstborn arrived, she and the Spider-Woman were researching how to make new underwear. Since the stockings had been changed, they might as well upgrade the underwear too. Both of them were unhappy that their research was interrupted. Thea brought Aramani a lot of information about the development of clothing and clothing on modern Earth, which made the Spider-Woman feel like she had found a treasure. Although the aesthetic of ancient Greece was different from that of modern times, it was still very useful. Thea also told the Spider-Woman her favorite style of clothing, and asked her to make a few sets according to it. Unfortunately, the enemy had come, so the two could only stop their research and run outside to do the fighting. When they arrived outside, the enemy army had already begun to form up. The main force was the wild wolves that had raised the firstborn. Because they had been contaminated with a lot of divinity, some of the wild wolves had already shown signs of walking upright. Most of the rest were ghost wolves. These animals had already reached the end of their lives, but because of the influence of the firstborn's divinity, they were still lingering on the border of life and death. Now they had all been recruited by the firstborn to fight. In addition, there were many ghost creatures in different shapes and sizes. Some were humans, some were beasts, and some were strangely shaped like humans and beasts. The gods reckoned that these creatures were the cannon fodder that the firstborn had recruited. Their role was to consume the magic power of the gods. Compared to the organized army of the Amazons on Mount Olympus, the army of the firstborn could be said to be endless. These cannon fodder were valuable as long as they could contain one god. The evil army began to march toward Mount Olympus in silence, as if dark clouds were pressing down on the city. "What do you think?" Diana whispered to Thea. She was referring to the firstborn. It was similar to how the Heavenly Father dealt with Darkseid. In a battle of this level, the battle between small soldiers would not affect the overall situation at all. As long as the firstborn could be dealt with, the ghost creatures would not be of any help. Thea looked a little serious. The strength of the firstborn was not a bluff. Just looking at its powerful and murderous appearance, she was not very confident. Chapter 602. It was a battle of revenge, a battle to the death, not to mention true divine power. Thea could not compare with the other party in terms of momentum. The other party had suppressed his anger for thousands of years, and it was said that it took him 6,000 years to climb back to the ground from the core of the earth. A minute ago, Hera was still discussing the issue of stockings and underwear, and the other party came at her. Unless there was a crushing difference in strength, it would be strange if she could defeat him. It was not the same style at all. And she was the goddess of trade and wealth, which had nothing to do with fighting. And this firstborn was similar to Hercules. They were both old gods who had escaped the twilight of the gods and were in relatively good condition. No one knew what his specific clergy was, but in Thea's view it was very similar to fighting and revenge. Diana asked again when she didn't answer for a long time. Thea saw that she was eager to try, and she complained in her heart. Between her and the firstborn, who was stronger and who was weaker, she needed to really fight, but Diana was definitely a little weaker, and this was the critical moment of her fusion of the source, so it was better not to fight. For her wife, the goddess of trade and wealth, could only fight the firstborn of Zeus. "Far worse than me," Thea whispered to Diana, and also pretended to be arrogant as if the enemy was not in her eyes. "No, I think he's quite strong." Diana had not seriously fought with Thea for a while. She really did not know the true strength of Thea after she became a god. Seeing her firmly guarantee, she slowly relaxed. The huge ghost army seemed to be moving slowly, but in fact, it was moving quickly towards Mount Olympus, and an invisible pressure began to envelop everyone's heads. Antiope, who replaced Hippolyte, was commanding the Amazons to set up a line of defense. Bundles of magic arrows, many enchanted swords, shields, and armors were sent to each warrior. The Amazons were the most elite warriors of this era, and Hera was not stingy with them. She opened the treasury of Mount Olympus and took out many precious equipment from ancient times. Unlike Hippolyte, Antiope was a pure warrior. She knew that the Amazons did not have the advantage in numbers, so she directly set up 3 lines of defense on the periphery and prepared a group of cavalry for mobility. The advantage of the firstborn's army was their numbers. There were endless ghosts and beasts, and the ratio of their numbers to the Amazons was almost 100 to 1. It was his idea to use quantity to fight quality. That was why he dared to come to Mount Olympus with his massive army and his own martial arts prowess. The advantage of the Greek gods was that they had a large number of gods. Even the most useless gods were more powerful than the monsters and beasts. They could defeat a large number of them with a wave of their hands. The only weakness was that they were forcibly conscripted by Hera. They could fight a favorable battle, but it was impossible to expect them to risk their lives against the firstborn. The depressing atmosphere lasted for an hour. All the gods came to the mountain peak to watch. A few of them were exchanging glances. The prophecy had clearly stated that the eldest son of Zeus would kill his brother and eventually ascend to the throne. The gods on the mountain were all in line with the prophecy. Each of them had their own plans. The firstborn came with thousands of years of hatred. No one could ignore its powerful power. They did not want to be the first to stand out. Zeus, Hera, according to the prophecy, "I want to take back everything that is mine." The firstborn, who was 3 meters tall and was wearing a dragonskin cloak, strode out and roared at Mount Olympus. Following his words, the spirits and beasts also roared at the sky. The hatred contained in their roars made the gods take a step back involuntarily. Hera looked a little sad. She was not in a good mood to fight with her own son, but seeing that both sides were waiting for her reply, she reluctantly stood up. "Child, I am your mother. I don't want to do this. It was Zeus' idea to abandon you." Seeing his mother, the firstborn was still a little silent. Hera continued, "The prophecy is a farce. I am willing to correct this mistake. We are still a family. Child, are you willing to give me this opportunity?" Before the firstborn could reply, a woman came out from behind his majestic figure. "Brother, don't listen to Hera's lies. She is afraid that you will take away her position as the king of gods." What a joke. A female king of gods. What a stupid woman. The woman looked gentle and beautiful. There was a hint of mockery at the corner of her mouth. She wore a silk robe and walked barefoot on the ground. Her voice was very soft, but every god, every female warrior, and many monsters on the battlefield heard it clearly. It was as if someone was whispering in their ear. An invisible energy soothed the firstborn's heartstrings. His eyes were filled with hatred again. Who is this? Thea joined the battle purely as a family member of Diana. She did not know the woman beside the firstborn. To be honest, when the two first fell in love, she spent a period of time studying Greek mythology to increase their common language. But later, she found that there were too many nonsensical stories in it, so she chose to abandon the book. She basically knew the famous ones, but she had to apologize to the less famous ones. Princess of Troy, daughter of Zeus. Cassandra. The old acquaintance Ares was standing beside the two women. When he heard Thea's question, he answered casually, looking at the old man who was out of breath. Thea was afraid that he would die at her feet. She smiled bitterly to show that she heard it. This guy has the power of speech, but he is only a demigod. The goddess of strife, Eris, stood on the other side of the two women. When humans stopped the war, she also suffered a lot. Her smooth skin showed signs of dehydration. She provoked everyone to fight. Eris's power also came from words. Cassandra's speech and her priesthood had something in common. That was why she was unhappy. Queen Hera, if you don't want blood to flow like a river in Mount Olympus, please get out of the way. Today is the moment when the prophecy comes true. Your firstborn will eventually ascend the throne of the King of Gods. Cassandra continued to show off her speech. The power of demigods came entirely from their own bodies. At their peak, they were definitely not as good as the gods. Unfortunately, times had changed. The gods were burdened by their own priesthoods, and now they were not as good as her. She was far from that point, but the influence of the speech was stirring up everyone's hearts. Except for a few gods and people like Hippolyte who had magic equipment to resist the mind, the firstborn would win and Hera would lose. Everyone could not help but have this thought. The morale of the Amazons was visibly low. Hera directly took out the scepter of the King of Gods and pointed it to the sky. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, and the huge thunder suppressed the speech. However, in Thea's eyes, it was like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. The scepter could not be used all the time, and the mouth was on the other side's face. She could still continue to speak. Hera had been the queen for too long. Her combat experience was too poor. Before the war, she had exposed one of her trump cards. Perhaps she wanted to show her majesty, but it was really not wise. Chapter 603. Lightning flashed across the sky, and for a moment, an unparalleled force swept across the surroundings. It was as if the heavenly might had turned into divine thunder, and the scene fell into a strange silence. However, lightning was not a cloud and it could not stay there forever. It came and went quickly, and in less than 10 seconds it disappeared into nothingness. Other than making Hera look awe-inspiring, it wasn't of any use at all. Thea could see the sarcasm in the corner of Cassandra's mouth. This guy's spirit of speech was really effective at bewitching ordinary people. If she was allowed to spout nonsense, other than a few strong-willed Amazons, the rest would not be able to withstand it. Your Majesty, I have a subordinate who should be able to deal with the spirit of speech, Thea whispered to Hera. Hera looked at the brilliance in her eyes and knew what she meant. Without any nonsense, she made the decision and raised a finger, indicating that Cassandra could choose anything from Zeus's treasury. Hera, who had a lot of assets, did not care about the treasury at all. After all, the treasures belonged to Zeus, and the throne of the god was hers. Thea gave her a look that said, "Don't worry about me." She directly teleported back to Earth. Her subordinates on Earth were not suitable to deal with this kind of ability that involved the rules, so she directly called Qing Nu and the Green Lantern Corps. After revising the Corps' mission, the number of people in the Corps had increased from the original 100 to more than 300. Thea did not summon all of them, and only asked Qing Nu to bring 100 people to help. The Green Lantern Corps' teleportation ability was unparalleled in the world, and the Corps came very quickly. Thea briefly explained the situation and brought everyone back to Mount Olympus. The strange appearance of the Green Lanterns attracted a burst of amazement from the gods. Thea felt that their worldview was still stuck in the era of the square sky and square earth, and they really could not explain what kind of existence aliens were. Qing Nu, who was holding the Book of Nu, directly showed the giant book. Compassion turned into subtle energy and poured into the hearts of the wavering Amazons. The fearful ones were encouraged, and the hesitant ones regained their courage. The reckless ones regained their rationality, and the cowardly ones straightened their chests. The remaining Green Lanterns established a new line of defense, a line of defense for the soul. Compassion was incomparably inclusive. It could accept good words and it could also absorb evil words. This was the purpose of Thea calling them here. That person really needs to be pitied. Qing Nu saw her eldest son and said in a calm voice, "You want to brainwash a god?" Thea looked at Qing Nu, who was becoming more and more otherworldly by the day, and her mind began to churn. To be honest, this was a good idea. The firstborn's strength was similar to hers. If he was washed into the green lamp, the green lamp's weak fighting power would be improved. In addition, it would allow the eldest son to let go of his hatred and reunite with Hera and her son. It could be said to be a great thing. But the premise is that you have to subdue him first. How about shooting light waves to brainwash him? Thea didn't have the ability to do that. The resistance of the gods was too high. She needed some ingenious plans to carry it out. While Thea was thinking about the feasibility of brainwashing the firstborn, Cassandra was still talking at the foot of the mountain until her throat was dry. She found that there was no movement on the mountain and looked at the firstborn awkwardly. Trash! The ferocious firstborn pushed Cassandra away like a ferocious beast. His eyes were murderous. When he saw Hera's figure, he suppressed the last bit of rationality in his heart, took out a dragon-toothed javelin from behind, and threw it at Hera. Diana grabbed her shield and wanted to block it, but Thea caught her. She secretly raised 3 fingers at Hera and raised her reward to 3 treasures. Seeing that Hera nodded happily, Thea took out the soft whip at her waist. This was the divine weapon of the god of Mars, Helimir. She had changed its appearance and reappeared in the divine world. With a crisp crack, Thea shook the whip and exerted force on her wrist. The soft whip stretched tens of thousands of meters and blocked the dragon-toothed javelin in the air. The fiery red whip was deflected by a small angle. The tip of the whip was like a giant red snake that wrapped around the black javelin. The dragon-toothed javelin lost its momentum and was directly thrown away. For a moment, Thea became the focus of the gods. The few gods on the Greek side did not know why she was interfering. This was the battle of the gods of Olympus. She was not one of them, right? The firstborn was also puzzled. Who was this guy in a golden robe with a hood that obscured his face? You are? Which god? The firstborn was very frank. He asked directly. Thea wanted to say that she was just passing by, but she could not say that. If she did not resist, Diana would have to do it. She could only bite the bullet. She did not answer the other party's question. It was really difficult to answer. The firstborn was here for revenge and also to see the throne of the god king. Whether from a legal or moral point of view, his reasons were legitimate. Thea stepped up, but she could not mention anything about the Greek gods. In order to avoid being unjustified, she had to think of a reason. She thought for a while and said, "I heard that you are the firstborn of Zeus. I want to challenge you." The firstborn was a little confused at first, but he quickly reacted. What was this guy doing here? Challenging him? He smiled with a ferocious face. Well, let me see what you can do first. After that, he pulled out a sword from the void. The blade was 10 meters long. Compared to the firstborn's height of 3 meters, it looked a little funny when he waved it around. The blade was edgeless and gray, more like a stone pillar. It was only because of the murderous intent that one would think that it was a murderous weapon. The main material of this sword was the spine of the black dragon that I killed years ago. It has been hammered in the earth's core for 6,000 years. Today, it will drink the blood of the gods. The firstborn was still putting pressure on Thea. Oomph! Thea sneered. What an outdated guy. Was the black dragon that powerful? The mages and warriors had killed many dragons. If these giant reptiles had not escaped into the dimensional space, the dragons would have been listed as a level 1 protected animal. In a world that you do not know. Thea raised her soft whip. This is the weapon of a god. Wasn't he just bragging about his achievements? Who was afraid of him? What's so great about killing a dragon? I killed a god. The firstborn did not want to waste any more time with her. He stood up and rushed towards her with the 10-meter-long sword in his hand. Bravado! 2 gods fighting on the mountain would inevitably hurt the innocent. Thea set the battlefield to be in the air. She swung the soft whip in her hand and poured magic into it. A silver-white flame ignited on the tip of the whip. Silver fire. This was the technique that Thea learned from Hramir's living fire. Unlike the firstborn who extracted it from a huge amount of spiritual power, Thea could only use pure magic to imitate it. The uniqueness of the living fire disappeared, and was replaced by the flexibility of magic power. The firstborn was caught off guard and the whip wrapped around his ankle. He hurriedly swung his sword at the soft whip. Thea pulled back the whip, but the silver fire was still attached to the firstborn. The dragon leather boots with amazing magic resistance sizzled as they were burned. Not bad. The firstborn reached out his huge palm and grabbed the silver fire. He exerted force with both hands and crushed the flame. I'm very capable. The silver flames that filled the sky were continuously danced by her. Chapter 604. You can take 1 or 2 balls of fire, but try hundreds or thousands of balls. Thea's magic quickly transformed. Her whip was like a snake, constantly flinging out silver flames. For a moment, the originally starry realm of the gods seemed to have multiplied. Countless silver flames with deadly light shrouded the whole sky. Try my silver flame cage. The flames were controlled by Thea, advancing and retreating in an orderly manner like a group of well-trained soldiers. The firstborn swung its long sword with all its might. The dragon sword tempered by the core of the earth was not afraid of the silver flames. The flames transformed from the purest magic were shattered by the firstborn. The residue fell to the ground, but it could still burn the spirits into ashes. Cassandra, who was in command of the army, hurriedly led the army away from the battlefield. The firstborn's fight was not ineffective. It was just that the firstborn was fast but Thea was faster. The colorless and transparent silver flames gradually piled up in the sky. The firstborn saw that the flames were increasing. It immediately stopped slashing and increased its speed to the maximum, ready to fight Thea in close combat. The firstborn ignored the flames. Its dragon skin with amazing magic resistance was burning black smoke. A large part of its open chest was also burned by the flames. But the distance between the two was rapidly closing. Your father is the god of thunder and lightning. I don't know how resistant you are to thunder and lightning. Thea's long whip kept dancing. It wrapped around the firstborn's wrist that was holding the sword. Her left hand gathered an amazing amount of thunder and lightning, and she threw it at the firstborn's face. Sparks danced. The gorgeous and deadly lightning struck the firstborn with an invincible momentum. The god who could make Zeus afraid did not hesitate. The muscles in his arms bulged, and he used all his strength to punch the lightning. With a muffled bang, Thea's lightning was shattered by the firstborn's physical strength. He did not use any divine power or skill, just an unparalleled amount of strength. She hated this kind of guy who did not use any skills. Thea was secretly angry. Although her attack was ineffective, at least she knew what the firstborn was relying on, and that was his strong body. The firstborn's physical strength was extraordinary. The two quickly closed the distance between them, and the 10-meter-long giant sword was swung horizontally towards Thea's waist. In the face of this sword that made a sonic boom, she could only temporarily dodge. She took out the holy sword and swung it with 10,000 rays of light, aiming straight for the firstborn's head. Under her control, the raging silver flames that filled the sky also rushed towards the firstborn. This guy ignored the burning of the silver fire, ignored the dazzling light, and focused on fighting Thea. After 3 moves, even though the firstborn seemed to have crawled out of the oven and Thea was forced to retreat, both of them chose to land on the ground and fight on the ground. Thea abandoned her whip and held her sword with both hands. Without any fancy moves, she slashed straight down. Of course, the firstborn would not use its head to test the edge of her sword. With a quick twist of its wrist, the firstborn drew an arc with its greatsword, trying to use its advantage of strength to deflect her attack. Unfortunately, it underestimated Thea's strength and the sharpness of the holy sword. In terms of pure strength, Thea was definitely not as good as it. Even a pure warrior like Diana was not as good as it. It was just that Thea had mixed the power of the soul in her sword. The power of the soul could be strong or weak. The Martian hunter could slay gods with this power, but she had not reached that level. She just added the power of the soul to herself, and for a short time it was enough to contend with the firstborn. The firstborn, who had underestimated its opponent, did not expect that this slender opponent had so much strength. Not only did it not deflect her attack, but it also left itself wide open. The holy sword with great force was about to hit the firstborn's head. The firstborn's weapon was too long, and it was too late to turn back, so it could only stretch out its left arm to block. The firstborn had a gauntlet on each of its arms. She did not see it clearly before, but now Thea saw that it was not a gauntlet, but 2 huge dragon teeth. The dragon teeth that resisted the holy sword were naturally the dragon teeth. They were as white as jade, and there were bursts of dragon aura emanating from them. However, against Thea, even the black dragon himself would be finished, let alone a dead tooth. With a crisp crack, the bright holy sword cut directly into the dragon teeth. At first, there was a slight delay, but soon it went all the way down, cutting the giant tooth in half from the middle. The holy sword did not stop and directly cut through the firstborn's dragon skin armor. Seeing that it was about to hurt the firstborn's body, the firstborn sacrificed the armor to buy himself less than 1/10 of a second. The firstborn's giant sword also turned to attack Thea. He relied on his own body and traded injuries for injuries. As the eldest son who relied on himself to fight since birth, he had suffered countless injuries. His strongest weapon was not so much the greatsword, but rather his tempered body. If Thea continued to cut, even if she could cut off the firstborn's arm, she would also be injured. She was only there to help, so naturally she would not risk her life so much. She stepped on the ground and left the firstborn's attack range. Sneaky guy, you are qualified to be my opponent. The firstborn's fighting spirit was completely aroused. It had been a long time since he met a god of the same level, and he was too lazy to ask who his opponent was. Humph, you talk as if you are so powerful, but that's all there is to it. Thea's voice was blurred by divine power, and it was impossible to tell whether it was a man or a woman. The firstborn had rich combat experience and would not underestimate the opponent because of the opponent's weakness, nor would it be angry because of slight. Realizing that the opponent was not inferior to itself, its fighting style began to become more stable. The gods watching the battle on Mount Olympus naturally had their own thoughts. Some were surprised and some were jealous. Eris, the goddess of strife, walked to Diana with a sinister smile on her face. Your little lover seems to be more powerful than you? As your sister, I really feel sorry for you. You have such a good aptitude, but now you have been surpassed. How does it feel? Diana was watching Thea's battle attentively, ready to save her if there was an emergency. To hell with the rules of the battle of gods. At first, she did not understand what Eris meant, but after a while, she realized that she was trying to drive a wedge between them. She sneered. Go away, Eris, you bitch who only knows how to show off your tongue. After that, she no longer looked at her. Diana's love was simple and single-minded. Once she confirmed her lover, she would repay him with everything she had. In the world of the League of Injustice, she had done countless bad things with Superman, and the starting point was her love for Superman. Her love was higher than her own values and even a little blind. Thea had always known this, but she had never meant to correct it. If Thea became evil, Batman and the Martian Manhunter would immediately become her enemy, and Oliver would also stop her. Only Diana would always be by her side. Even if she had to fight with her friends, turn against her people, or even become the enemy of the whole world, she would go on without regrets for the love in her heart. So Eris's self-righteous provocation was laughable and boring in the eyes of the Valkyrie. She did not even bother to explain. The greater the achievement of her lover, the happier she would be. Jealous? How could it be? Chapter 605. Is she using some kind of secret technique to increase her combat power? Hera's question was more normal. She had to be concerned. She did not have the combat power to fight against the firstborn. If Thea and Diana left, she could only ignore the dignity of the Divine King and live like a coward. This choice was worse than death in the eyes of Hera, who had always been prideful. In the face of her mother and Antiope's superior, Diana still maintained a relative respect. She answered readily, "This is her real combat power. There are still many tricks that she has not shown." When it came to her lover, Diana's heart was full of joy. She was not boasting. Seeing that Thea and the firstborn were evenly matched in close combat, she was confident that her lover could win. After all, Thea's strength was not close combat. She used her weakness to attack the enemy's strength. She was more testing the enemy's strength. It turned out that her guess was not wrong. Thea was indeed gathering information. There was not much divine power in the firstborn. It relied more on its physical strength to fight against the combination of divine power and spiritual power. It was not weak. A strong body brought about an all-round improvement. Its strength was great, its speed was fast, and its stamina was almost endless. However, the firstborn's weakness was still obvious. Its strength was completely dependent on its body. Opponents who were not as strong as it could only feel deep despair because they could not kill it. If one was on the same level as it, one would find a weakness that was not a weakness. The firstborn lacked the means to win in one blow. Thea, who was confident, began to attack. The strong confidence made her spiritual power rise to another level. The firstborn on the opposite side had the trait of becoming more and more courageous as it fought. It also squeezed out physical strength crazily in the fierce battle. And as the number of injuries increased, its physical attack power became more and more powerful. The holy sword and the giant sword kept colliding. The holy sword that gathered the faith of all beings was still shining brightly, while the firstborn's giant sword was a little overwhelmed. So what if it was the spine of the black dragon? So what if it was buried in the earth's core for 6,000 years? It was still cut like a saw by Thea. The range of the battle between the two was getting larger and larger. At first, the firstborn was still worried about its subordinates. Later, when the battle became more intense, it became hot-headed and could not care less. Many ghosts and beasts were hit by the aftershocks. Some were directly scattered by the enormous force of the giant sword, while others were hit by the radiance of the holy sword and turned into ashes. It was as if they had never existed. Cassandra could only tell the army to dodge. It was easy to say, but the army of close to 100,000 could not dodge at all. The evil Thea purposely dragged the firstborn into the enemy's army, and many of the ghost creatures were in for a bloodbath. Wherever the two of them passed, it could be said to be a mess. The battle lasted for an hour. The firstborn was still in high spirits, but Thea was a little tired. Combining multiple powers required a lot of energy. She had finally figured out the strength of the firstborn, and she began to go all out. Spotting an opening, Thea infused a large amount of soul power, divine power, and mana into her holy sword as she slashed down at the firstborn who could not dodge in time. Not knowing why the opponent suddenly attacked, the firstborn chose to defend cautiously. It moved its greatsword horizontally, trying to block the attack. What happened next stunned him. Thea did not intend to hurt the enemy at all. She wanted to destroy the firstborn's sword. The firstborn's parry missed. Without the support of his power, the greatsword could only rely on its own material to block the oncoming holy sword. With a crisp clang, 1/3 of the greatsword was cut off by the holy sword. She wants to destroy my weapon? The firstborn felt very distressed for a moment, and thought that he understood Thea's sinister intentions. However, this was all an illusion. To deal with a person who could create miracles with great power, one had to use a dirty trick. Using the loophole in his mind, Thea finally began to use the divine power of wealth when the two of them passed by each other. She took off her hood and revealed her stunning face. "Look into my eyes." Her confused eyes mixed with a large amount of compassion directly hit the firstborn's mind. Anger was still not fully mastered, and the opponent's rage points were already high enough. There was really no need to add fuel to the fire. As for fear, it was not practical either. Hatred had a strong counteracting effect on fear. In the end, Thea chose compassion, which was the most inclusive of all. "I'll be merciful and pity you." Such a strange attack really hit the firstborn's weak spot. Growing up in the wilderness, there were no gods to teach him how to use his divine power. Without guidance, he only knew how to train his body over and over again. He had no experience in dealing with emotional shocks. Even if his chest was full of hatred, Thea's confusing divine power still pried open a gap, and a large amount of compassion poured into his heart. He hated the heavens and the earth, but was it not because he lacked love and a kind of self-protection from his loved ones? As the compassion poured into his heart, the direct result was that his fierce eyes showed signs of calmness, and the murderous aura that shrouded his body shrank visibly. Unlike mortals, the firstborn was after all a god, and the first son of Zeus and Hera. He knew that he was confused and struggled to suppress the calmness in his heart, trying to find himself again. After 2 tries, he found that the effect was not great. No matter how great his hatred was, it was not enough in the face of the compassion of all intelligent beings in the universe. Helplessly, he could only force himself to chase after Thea. His combat instinct told him that as long as he killed this woman, he could find himself again. Thea did not feel good about brainwashing a god with compassion. Compassion poured into the firstborn's heart through her body as a medium. She also had to stay awake at all times to avoid being taken advantage of. Her advantage over the firstborn was that her spiritual power was much higher than the other parties. Although her compassion was a little indiscriminate between friend and foe, she still had some advantages as a controller. To kill 1,000 enemies, she would lose 800 of her own men. No matter how she looked at it, her chances of winning were higher. The seed of the heart had been planted, and the next step was to continue to absorb emotions, and then transfer them into the firstborn's heart. Thea did not want to fight the firstborn head-on. She used flash to buy time. No matter how powerful a god was, it was still an individual. How could it resist the convergence of the universe's emotions in the spiritual world? It was not that such an existence did not exist, but the firstborn in front of her certainly did not have this ability. Their chase slowly came to a stop because they were too tired. Thea's forehead was soaked with sweat, and round beads of sweat dripped down her smooth chin to the ground. The firstborn on the opposite side was even worse. He barely stood there with his long sword, his whole body covered in sweat. The speed of losing control of the spiritual world was accelerating, and the external symptoms were that half of his face was calm and peaceful, while the other half was full of tension and resentment. Thea did not expect this guy to be so resistant. He was using his strong points to attack the enemy's weak points, and it was so tiring. But seeing that victory was in sight, she unilaterally increased the output of emotions. She had to convert this guy before the 2 armies. Chapter 606. The gods were watching. Some of them did not know what Thea and the firstborn were doing. Gods like Ares, the god of war, and Dionysus, the god of wine, could not understand. Some knew, such as Hera and Eris, the goddess of strife. These magic and spiritual types could feel the emotions violently attacking the self-consciousness of the firstborn. Hera, the biological mother, was a little conflicted about the brainwashing of the firstborn, but it was not a bad thing to be brainwashed. As for Diana, who knew Thea best, there was only nervousness left. The confrontation in the spiritual world was very dangerous, and she could only look at her lover worriedly. Most of the gods were watching with an optimistic attitude. The firstborn was defeated, and Thea had the upper hand. This could be seen without a deep vision. Cassandra, who was leading the army of the firstborn, could only watch. Limited by her realm, she could only be anxious and helpless. Just as she was hesitating, a subtle and undetectable voice floated into her ears. After a little hesitation, she finally made up her mind. Firstborn, think about your past. Your revenge has not been avenged. You were exiled at birth and persisted for 6,000 years. Remember your mission. Remember the injustice of fate. Remember. Cassandra spoke quickly. Her voice was so loud that it resounded throughout the battlefield. The firstborn, who was getting more and more confused, finally managed to suppress the erosion of compassion with the power of the spirit of speech. However, the price of Cassandra's participation was extremely high. The spirit of speech always had a limit, and the emotional energy that had been accumulated was suddenly detonated. The firstborn could be said to be the strongest old god except for Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, and Thea was also the best of the new gods. The gods, including Diana, had been watching on the sidelines. On the one hand, it was because the battle of the gods had always been one-on-one, and this was a matter of rules. On the other hand, it was beyond their power. If they were not at the level of Zeus or the Father, rashly joining was simply courting death. Cassandra understood this, but she also vowed to take revenge on the gods. Without the help of the firstborn, she could do nothing. If the firstborn was instigated by the other party, it would be even more disastrous. Therefore, after receiving the secret reminder, even if she knew the price, she still rushed into this battle. The firstborn's strong resistance and Thea's crazy infusion were all withstood by her. She was just an ordinary demigod. How could she withstand the combined attack of two true gods? Puff! With a loud explosion, a large amount of blood spurted out. Unlike ordinary people who vomited blood from their mouths, Cassandra vomited blood from her throat. The violent emotional energy directly exploded in her throat, and her vocal cords, trachea, and throat were blown to pieces. Her innate gift of speech was directly crippled, and her neck was badly mangled. She fell to the ground, and it was unknown whether she was dead or alive. On the other side, the two true gods were also suffering. The firstborn barely kept his consciousness and escaped the fate of being brainwashed, but he looked extremely tired. His original brown-black skin was now as white as paper. When his emotions exploded, he and Cassandra spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. Their hands holding the sword trembled uncontrollably. Thea also had blood in the corner of her mouth. The emotional backlash made her very uncomfortable. But her spiritual resistance was much higher than the firstborn's, and she had been the one on the attack, so she suffered less damage. Thea's eyes wandered, and she automatically looked at the empty space on the other side of the battlefield. She waved her soft whip, and a figure jumped out from the raging silver fire. He was dressed in rags, holding a cane, and a pair of bird's claws where his feet should be. Thea was very unhappy that her conversion had failed. She looked at the person with a gloomy face and said, "Hermes, you insidious villain." Hermes, who had lost his hypocritical face, looked indifferent. He looked coldly at Cassandra and the firstborn, and the corner of his mouth drew a contemptuous arc. His eyes could not help but look at Thea. "Your strength is so strong that you can suppress the firstborn of Zeus. You are really extraordinary. But how much strength do you have left now?" Hermes said as he gently stroked his cane and pulled out a very thin blade. Thea wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and said, "This firstborn did consume a lot of my divine power, but I still have companions. What do you have?" Following her words, Diana also came to her side. The Valkyrie looked coldly at Hermes, the guy who had deceived her. "Tell us where Zola and her child are, and we can spare your life." Diana stood in front of Thea with two swords in her hands and asked sternly. Hermes let out a burst of silent ridicule, filled with disdain and contempt. Thea was disgusted by his attitude. She resisted the discomfort and set up a time-stop enchantment. She wanted to join hands with Diana to take down this annoying bug. But the accident still happened. Hermes turned into a stream of light and ran out of her enchantment in an instant. In Thea's view, this speed was not inferior to Barry's. Hermes was not so fast in the past. There was the twilight of the gods, and then there was the rise of the god of speed. Hermes, who had speed as his priesthood, should be lying in the nursing home with Ares. How could he suddenly burst into such high speed? Surprised? I was faster than this when I was at my peak. This is only half of my speed. As if he had expected their doubts, Hermes smiled grimly and pointed at the gods on the mountain peak. "Since we are brothers and sisters, let me remind you that His Majesty Hades' army is about to flatten Mount Olympus. Think carefully about your position." After that, he took out a black whistle from his arms. An obscure sound wave shrouded the army of the firstborn. All the spirits seemed to have received some kind of signal, and one by one, they rushed to the Amazon camp. Hermes teleported away with the firstborn under Thea and Diana's angry eyes. As for Cassandra, who was lying in a pool of blood, he did not even look at her. The army of nearly 100,000 spirits did not distinguish between friend and foe. The werewolves of the firstborn and the Amazons were all within their attack range. The battlefield was in chaos. The gods were shocked by the news of Hades' impending arrival. Antiope, who was facing the attack, fought hard, but still had some of his subordinates injured. "I'm fine. You go and help." Thea certainly could not stop Diana. This kind of low-intensity battle would not affect her. Fighting side by side with her people may further understand the meaning of protection. As for herself, she was sore all over and did not have much combat power at the moment. After teleporting back to the top of the mountain, the gods also felt that it was beneath their dignity to be frightened by a sentence. They all began to clean up the army of spirits. The green lamps helped Thea to calm her spiritual world and shared the burden of compassion. With the help of the gods, the Amazons' defense line quickly stabilized. Javelins, crossbows, and many other weapons that were infused with magical light entered the battle. The ghost creatures fell like wheat being harvested, turning into a cloud of smelly black ash. Chapter 607. Diana did not take the initiative to attack, but continued to support everywhere. Even if there were a few injured female warriors, she would send them to the rear in time. With the help of Qing Nu's Book of Nu, they would quickly recover. The battle lasted for a whole day, and a large number of ghostly creatures were finally wiped out by the gods. The werewolves, who were loyal to the firstborn, fled the battlefield soon after the battle. One of the key figures of the war, Cassandra, was captured by the Amazons who were inspecting the battlefield. The Princess of Troy was still alive, but her injuries were too serious and she was still in a coma. The broken part of the firstborn's greatsword was also picked up by Diana. Even if it was only 1/3 of the sword, it was still nearly 3 meters long. The spine of the black dragon had been forged in the core of the earth, and Diana, who was also proficient in forging, felt that it would be a good material no matter what weapon it was made of. Thea finally eased her discomfort with the help of the green lanterns, and Diana entered her spiritual world again to help her slowly stabilize. The Valkyrie was also exhausted. She was a very pure warrior goddess, and she liked swords, fists, and feet more than spiritual power. Fortunately, her level was high, and her shortcomings were not obvious. She also knew how to use spiritual power. After 3 full days, the two goddesses, mainly Thea, finally recovered. Occasionally, she would have a headache, but it did not affect the overall situation. Her spiritual power was less than half of her peak, and she could not brainwash the firstborn in a short time. Plus, the other party was prepared and would not be fooled again. Thea was quite regretful that she had lost this good opportunity. The firstborn was very powerful, and it would be a super fierce fighter in the Green Lantern Corps. Yes, she worked so hard to brainwash firstborn, but not for Hera. Thea did not intend to return him in the first place. An appropriate ceasefire would have been enough. You didn't take your own son with you, and now that he has reached the maximum level, you want to repair the relationship? How could there be such a good thing? Unfortunately, all her plans fell through. An insignificant character ruined her plan, and Thea was very upset. When she heard that Cassandra was captured, she took Diana to have a look. Miserable, really miserable. Cassandra, who was facing an emotional explosion, was lying on the bed alone. There was no one around to take care of her. Fortunately, she was also the daughter of Zeus, so no one abused her. However, her beautiful face was twitching because of the pain. There was a big bloody hole in her neck, which still showed her reckless behavior. Thea stretched out her hand and released a ball of magic to examine her. After a while, she snorted coldly. This troublemaker could be said to be completely crippled. Her vocal organs had exploded into a bloody mist. Even if her skin and flesh grew back, her talent had already left her forever along with her vocal cords. In order to take revenge against the gods, this woman was willing to sacrifice herself in order to retain the power to challenge the gods. Needless to say, it was similar to the Spider-Woman Armani. There must be a tragic story behind this. Thea could only say that the Greek gods had done too many immoral things, and she had to take the blame for them again. Walking out of the lounge, he saw that the Amazons were still passionately preparing for battle. However, the gods were a little disappointed. The Netherworld King had given them too much pressure. In the evening, Hera gathered the gods to discuss the next step of the plan. There were 2 empty chairs at the scene. The goddess of agriculture and the goddess of strife had run away. The only one left was Ares, the god of war, who was on his last breath. The old man sat on the chair with his eyes half closed. If it weren't for his weak breathing, Thea would have thought that he was dead. The other two present were Dionysus, the god of wine, and Hephaestus, the god of fire. The god of fire had a good relationship with Diana and Thea. Unfortunately, he had a good clergy in vain. Because of his hobbies, he had changed his talent tree from the original god of fire to the current god of blacksmiths. He was also a god of faith. Where could you find a blacksmith in the 21st century? He was supposed to be a fierce warrior in the front lines, but now he had completely become a support staff and was extremely weak. The remaining god of wine had some fighting power. There were people who liked wine in all ages. He did not have many believers, but it had never stopped. He could be said to be the god in the best condition. But the god of wine. Just by hearing his name one could tell that he was weak. It was impossible to expect him to defeat Hades. Hera was speechless as she looked at her subordinates. The old were old and the weak were weak. This was also the reason why she hurriedly invited Thea and Diana when she heard that they had recovered. "Your Majesty Hera, what's with Hermes' speed?" Thea asked her own question first. Unlike Barry's reverse lightning, the resistance of mortals to magic was completely different from that of gods. If many speed reduction spells did not work, Thea would be very passive when dealing with an extremely fast enemy. It should be that Hades gave him something from the underworld. If I'm not wrong, Hermes' way of life has been rewritten. He doesn't look like a living being now. Without the disadvantage of being jealous, Hera's knowledge was unparalleled after following Zeus for so many years. She analyzed calmly. Undead? Lich? Zombie? These were the things that came to Thea's mind. Sacrificing one's life to turn oneself into a high-level undead creature. But Hermes' sacrifice was not a small one. Giving up the dignity of a god and becoming Hades' henchman was not a good decision. However, Hermes had recovered a lot of strength, which troubled Thea. Speed was really not something she was good at. Hera lowered her head and pondered. The army of the underworld was boundless. Even Zeus couldn't ignore it when he was still alive. Due to the rules, the number of dead in the underworld had to be maintained at a certain level. Hades couldn't mobilize all of his forces, but even 1/10 of them was a terrifying number. Judging from the fact that Hermes could control those ghost creatures, the firstborn in Hades must have some behind-the-scenes deals. The difficult situation gave Hera a headache. She looked at Thea. "The next time the firstborn comes, can you still stop him?" Thea thought for a moment. She did not want to give up the firstborn as an excellent fighter. Olivier was stubborn. In fact, she also had this trait in her character, but she thought it was called persistence. "He must be prepared. I can't guarantee it. Our comprehensive strength is about the same. He's good at close combat and I'm good at long range. It's hard to say who will win." Of course, Thea would not guarantee it. At the same time, she thought to herself that the firstborn would attack again. If she did not recover to her best state, perhaps she should gather all the green lamps together next time? The meeting ended hastily, and no one could make any constructive suggestions. In order to encourage or comfort Thea, Hera directly opened Zeus's collection room and let her choose 3 treasures. This was a deal for Thea. Her friendship with Hera was far from the point where she would stand up for her. Getting paid for doing things was in line with the purpose of the goddess of wealth and trade. In the face of the wide-open treasury, she did not stand on ceremony. She pulled Diana and walked in. As a powerful and restless god-king, Zeus's treasury could be said to be the best in the world. Unlike the Heavenly Father who liked to stay at home and did not step out of the house, Zeus's old man was young at heart. He wandered around the world and found many little girls, and he did not let go of any treasures. He was powerful and had a good eye. Countless treasures were picked up by him and brought back to his home. The goddess of wealth had her own identification skill. Even if she could not name many treasures, Thea knew the general purpose, and that was enough for her to choose. Many treasures, even with Thea's current strength, were tempting. The dazzling brilliance made her little heart beat wildly. She was not a law-abiding person. She could not help but think, how nice it would be if these treasures were hers. Chapter 608. However, she also knew that this was just wishful thinking. After all, Boss Zeus was still alive. Making a deal with Hera was fair and just. No one would say anything if she took a few treasures, but if she took them away in the dark of the night, she would be in big trouble. The trouble with happiness was that there were too many choices. Back on Paradise Island, Thea was happy for a few nights with a fake godslayer. At that time, she thought that there were very few treasures in the world, and that it was not easy to find them. Until today, Thea realized that it was not that there were few treasures in the world, but that Zeus had taken all the treasures back home in advance. Taking advantage of the fact that he had created his account early, this boss had probably ransacked the entire place, which was why the outside world was so clean. Even a piece of divine artifact could be used as a treasure, while the treasures in his own home were piled up like a mountain. Boss Zeus had fully demonstrated what it meant to walk the path of others and leave them with no way out. What should she choose? Thea stroked her chin and pondered. Diana was looking at these treasures with the intention of broadening her horizons. She could not give any constructive suggestions. Thea looked at Hera, who was standing outside the door of the treasury. This person was also very cunning. She seemed to be generous and let Thea choose whatever she wanted. In fact, there were definitely good and bad treasures in here. If she picked a good one, she would have profited. If she picked a bad one, she could only blame it on her bad luck. Hera was not responsible for explaining. Everything depended on her. Thea could only concentrate her divine power in her eyes. She wanted to use her position as the god of wealth to find the most valuable item in this treasury. Her eyes were full of radiance. Thea could not name many treasures, so she could only judge by the god of wealth. A nameless gauntlet, 1 meter of golden light. Thea picked it up and looked at it, then put it down. She turned her head and saw a black iron arrow, 1 meter of golden light. This is the hidden arrow that killed Achilles, Diana explained. Thea weighed the arrow in her hand. She did not like this kind of weapon that hurt people secretly, so she put the iron arrow back to its original position and continued to search. As she walked, she found a good item. It was a shiny golden cup. The Eye of Wealth determined that this cup was very valuable. Leto used the sunlight of the Aegean Sea to forge the Holy Grail for her son, Apollo. It shines like the sun even in the dark night. Legend has it that it can even eliminate negative emotions and all kinds of darkness. Diana looked at it for a long time this time and compared it with her memory. Thea felt that this thing was not bad, mainly because of its ability to eliminate negative emotions. It was very convenient for her to control anger. She ticked this Holy Grail in her heart and left it for last. After that, she saw many treasures. She wasn't lacking in weapons and armor at the moment, so her gaze was all on those treasures with miraculous effects. Most of the evil items were not in his consideration. His main focus was on the legendary treasures such as Odysseus' ruby, which was given to him by his wife Penelope on the eve of his expedition to Troy. The ruby contained the love of a wife. Thea also saw the famous golden apple. As long as she carried this apple with her, it would increase her charm. Her charm attribute was about to explode. It was better to leave it for Hera to admire. While she was strolling around, a ball in the corner suddenly caught her attention. Golden fleece? A furry ball of fleece was casually piled up in the corner. Compared to the many divine weapons and subdivine weapons, this ball of fleece was insignificant. However, Thea's divine power of wealth told her that this thing was priceless. How could this be? Thea touched the fleece. Other than being a little soft, there didn't seem to be anything unusual. What was she going to do with this thing? Was she going to make a scarf? Thea's thoughts diverged as she pondered about its use. She shook her head and smiled secretly. She stood up and was about to continue looking at other things. However, just as she took a step, a strong premonition in her heart told her that she would miss something if she left. The premonition came without reason. She turned back. That's right, this ball of fleece was the most dazzling thing in the entire treasure room. Perhaps it had an unknown use or contained some secrets. Trust your intuition. Thea didn't hesitate and picked up the fleece. After picking and choosing for a long time, she finally chose Austin's ruby of love, Leto's golden cup, and the golden fleece whose use she couldn't explain. Hera didn't comment on her choice. She had the right to choose. Whether she earned or lost, it had nothing to do with her. The ruby of love could provide her with enough love and emotions, but the process of absorbing them would come after anger. The golden cup would automatically take effect when placed next to her. It could eliminate all kinds of negative emotions. For her, who dealt with all kinds of emotions every day, it was a rare divine weapon. Thea carried the golden fleece back to her room. She and Diana closed the door to study it. The two studied from myths and legends to the golden fleece's diet and genetic mutation. But they didn't find anything. Did I make the wrong choice? Thea was a little unconfident. What could this thing be used for? Could it be used to make long johns for the long-legged goddess? Just as she was letting her thoughts run wild, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Among the golden fleece, a small thread caught her attention. Although it was also yellow, the fleece was golden. What caught her attention was a pale yellow thread. The moment Thea saw the thread, she seemed to see quicksand passing through her fingertips. Time flew by quickly. The sun, the moon, and the stars were constantly changing. An indescribable feeling of vicissitudes flowed in her heart. What is this? This is fleece, you must be kidding me. Thea only felt that it was ridiculous. Although it was just a glance, the power of the thread was something that even she couldn't resist. Among the people she had seen in her life, perhaps only the Heavenly Father could resist it. If this was the golden fleece, then wouldn't the original male sheep be heaven-defying? She called Diana to take a look. A magical scene appeared. Diana looked in the direction of her finger for a long time, but didn't see any strange thread. Thea was confused. Am I the only one who can see it? Thea's little heart was beating fast. She asked Diana to keep a lookout for her and carefully studied it. It was too reckless to touch it directly. She separated a trace of her spiritual power and tried to communicate with the thread. At least she had to know what it was. As soon as the spiritual power touched it, it was shattered before any information could be transmitted. Thea thought that it was an offensive weapon. She carefully guarded for a long time, only to find that the thread was still hidden in the pile of fleece. There was no further movement at all. The eldest young miss was a little confused. There was no doubt that this thread was very magical. Thea calmed down and thought of several worst-case scenarios. In order to prevent accidents from happening, she prepared several instantaneous spells in advance and firmly locked onto her own coordinates. Unless it was in existence far more powerful than her, it was impossible to teleport her away. Only then did she try to touch the silk thread for the second time. Chapter 609. The second test also ended in failure. The golden thread stubbornly cut off the connection between the two sides and did not say anything. Diana could not help with this kind of mysterious thing. She carefully thought about various myths and legends, but could not remember anything special about this sheep. This thread should not be from the golden fleece. It's more like it was mixed in and was accidentally brought out by you. Diana carefully analyzed for her, and could only come to this conclusion. Thea could also think of this. How could the golden sheep be so powerful just as a background? If even a hair of the golden sheep was so powerful, Hera would not have to worry about the firstborn in Hades. If the enemy came again, she could just close the door and let the sheep go. Then Thea began to persevere with the golden thread. On the fourth try, she increased the output of her spiritual power and finally saw something. It turned out that she was completely wrong before. The thread was not attacking her. But there was too much information and it directly exploded her spiritual power. Thea's spiritual power was not the same as strength and speed. It had always been her strength. Even if it was only a trace of her spiritual power, it was stronger than the total spiritual power of an ordinary person. Although she was not a god of faith and needed to respond to the prayers of believers from time to time, her total spiritual power could still crush 80% of the old and new gods today. She began to gradually increase her spiritual power while maintaining the necessary vigilance. At first, the images transmitted back were fragmented, like the ravings of a lunatic. She only saw scattered images of some tall buildings and people in the city. It was not until she injected a full 1/3 of her spiritual power that the mysterious thread was finally revealed in front of her eyes. What the hell was the golden fleece? Thea deeply realized the importance of the stacking of modern corporate items. She should tell the old man Zeus about the advanced concept of classification later. The way he piled all the treasures together was too low. After a long time, the old man would not know how many treasures he had. Now the thread mixed in the golden fleece was a clear proof. Diana couldn't see it because she didn't have enough mental power. Hera was a god who was good at magic, and she was now in charge of the king of God's scepter. If she looked carefully, she would most likely be able to see it. It was only because she hadn't been paying attention that a treasure was mixed in with the wool, allowing Thea to pick it up. These were the threads of the three goddesses of fate. The three goddesses were Croso, who was in charge of the future and weaving the threads of life, Lachesis, who determined the length of the threads of life, and Atropos, who was responsible for severing the threads of life. The three goddesses were born at the beginning of the universe's chaos. They controlled the fate of the 12 titans represented by the second-generation god-king, Uranus, and the 12 Olympian gods represented by Zeus. Their authority could not be measured by the standards of the old gods or the new gods. They were not gods of faith like Ares, nor were they gods of nature like Zeus. Their status was more transcendent. As the masters of fate, they were more like conceptual gods in Thea's eyes. The thread that Thea was in contact with was the thread of the future woven by the smallest of the three goddesses, Croso. It contained a power called fate. Ordinary people would talk about the future with longing, but from the perspective of the gods there was only fear. The gods' level of life had reached the peak. In fact, they were very afraid of change. Today there was a new god to replace the old one. Tomorrow there would be a new god to replace the old one. Wanting to transcend the arrangement of fate was an impossible task. Just look at Reverse Lightning, who had racked his brains, and it was clear that no matter how hard he tried, he was still unable to escape the shackles of fate. The more he struggled, the closer fate would entangle him, until he breathed his last. Ever since the day she found out about her fate, Thea had been preparing for it, not only for her family but also for herself. Back then she had wanted to ride on the coattails of Superman and Batman, but now the tables had turned. It was time for others to ride on her coattails. It seemed like she had gained a lot, but fate still did not let her go. Instead, it pushed her into the teeth of the storm. Because of her struggles, fate's shackles on her became tighter and tighter. Putting everything else aside, she was the main force in the war against Darkseid. Whether it was from the perspective of the Heavenly Father or from the perspective of the people on Earth, she was responsible. Those who were weak could do nothing, but those who were strong could not do so. Transmigrators could not do whatever they wanted. As long as they were in the game, they were also pawns of fate. Whether it was Reverse Lightning from the 25th century, the Queen of Emerald Eyes from the 31st century, or Lantern One, who had traveled 10 billion years and was nicknamed Reverend Idung, they all proved this. It was as if there was an invisible hand constantly pushing her forward. And now this thread brought Thea a possibility. Perhaps she could break free from the shackles of fate in the future? It was too early to talk about the future. Aside from the unconventional forces, Thea was considered a powerhouse on Earth and in the universe. But so what? Even the fate of Darkseid's first lantern had been sealed. It was still a long time before she could break free from her fate. Thea tried to put the thread of fate into her spiritual space, but unfortunately, the thread could not go in at all. Should she find a place to hide it? But she was still worried. She now understood that Zeus had probably hidden the thread of fate in the golden fleece because it could not be taken away. Thea could not think of a better idea. The golden fleece could not be hidden, and she could not parade it around the city every day. She chose to hide it in her hair. She had blonde hair anyway, so it was not out of place. The golden fleece was still shining after the thread of fate was taken away, but it no longer had the inestimable value in Thea's eyes. It was now just a decent decoration. Should I make a scarf for you? Thea looked at the long-legged goddess mockingly. The golden fleece was of no use to gods who fought and killed all day. Diana knew her character, so she just laughed it off. The next day, Hera asked her about her thoughts on the underworld invasion in private. Although the main reason was that Thea did not have good taste, the second reason was that Thea did not tell the truth. As the subject of the transaction, the two sides had completed the transaction. Thea could take it with a clear conscience. She was willing to give it to her, but she still felt a little guilty when she remembered that Zeus was still alive. Your Majesty, Hera, let me give you 3 suggestions. If Hades were to attack Mount Olympus, she would feel that the reward would be too much for her to handle. If she were to put in the effort to settle the matter, Zeus would have nothing to say even if he were to think about it in the future. Oh, please go ahead. Hera saw that she was serious and became serious. First, I suggest that you recall Hercules. He is an important fighting force of Mount Olympus. Wait, you mean Hercules is still alive? Hera was a little incredulous. I saw him a while ago. He just escaped from the seal. Thea nodded and waited for Hera to digest the news. To be honest, the relationship between Hera and Hercules was at the level of hatred in her opinion. Hercules was the son of Zeus and Alcmene. This woman was Zeus' great-granddaughter according to seniority. She was very evil with Zeus and gave birth to Hercules. The feud between Hera and Hercules could be written into a book. What's the next suggestion? Hera gritted her teeth. She was not very willing. Join forces with Poseidon and attack the underworld, Thea said with certainty. Chapter 6:10. Hera looked at her as if she was crazy. Are you talking nonsense? We were discussing how to resist Hades' army, and now you're telling me to fight back and join forces with Poseidon? You heard me right. I mean to gather the gods and fight in the underworld, forcing Hades to sign the treaty. Thea felt that fate was encouraging her to rush forward, but she really had to follow the established route. If Hades attacked Mount Olympus from time to time, Diana would have to come back every few days, and she wouldn't have time to do anything else. The final outcome would be the defeat of the gods, who would give up Mount Olympus and flee to the human world. Didn't Hades have an endless number of soldiers? She didn't need to use guerrilla warfare. She didn't want to fight a war of attrition with him. She wanted to attack his weakness and lead the gods to attack his base. Our soldiers are far inferior to his, but the gods are here. If Hercules is included, our high-end combat power can completely crush Hades. Poseidon's army will also take a large part of the pressure. Seeing that Hera was still hesitating, she could only continue her analysis. Mount Olympus, Poseidon, and Hades. Among them, we are the weakest, followed by Poseidon, and Hades is the strongest. I heard that the ownership of the river Styx has always been the focus of their debate. We can use this as a breakthrough to attack the underworld. Hera was still hesitating. This idea was too bold. She felt that it made some sense, but she was afraid that it would completely collapse because of a mistake. She clenched her fingers tightly and couldn't make up her mind. You want to start a war? I heard it. I have to say that it's a good idea. Ares, who was already in his twilight years, suddenly walked into the room and spoke his mind. Thea ignored Ares and continued to give Hera ideas. Diana can go find Hercules, but you have to give up your past views and accept him again. I can also persuade Poseidon. Hera was a little surprised that Milady was going all out for the threat of fate. She didn't understand why Milady was so proactive. I'm still the God King. I'm not in a hurry. Why are you so anxious? She couldn't figure it out, but it was a good thing. She lowered her head and thought, Hercules, as long as he doesn't object, I can accept him again on behalf of Mount Olympus. As for the personal grudge between us, if he is willing to take a step back, I can pretend that it never happened. Hera said through gritted teeth. The grudges between her and the Hercules were far too abundant. How could they be erased with a smile? How could that be? The only way was for both sides to take a step back at the same time. Otherwise, they would start fighting when they met. As for allying with the sea monarch, she had obviously spent a lot of time thinking about it. Once the alliance was complete, he would have to send out his troops. He couldn't possibly tell the Ocean Emperor that he was just teasing him, and that he should just go back to where he came from. If that happened, the Ocean Emperor would have to attack Hera first before using the underworld. Not long after, she thought of a new question. Can you find Poseidon? I only know a general location, but I remember that he was very close to the Atlanteans. Of course, Thea knew about this. Otherwise, she would not have come up with this idea. Don't worry, I'm also friends with the Atlanteans. Poseidon had always been a god worshipped by the Atlanteans. It was said that he lived in the deepest part of the sea. Thea felt that it would not be difficult to find this god with the help of the sea monarch couple. As for how to persuade him after that, it could only be said to be improvisation. There was a 70% chance that she would use her fists. The nature of this world was that there was no need to show off. Whoever had the bigger fist would have the right to speak. The strength of the sea monarch was far inferior to Zeus. In Thea's opinion, he was most likely at the same level as the firstborn. Against an enemy of this level, she did not think that she would lose if she went all out. She even wanted to take a look at the sea monarch's treasury. What if there was a treasure like the thread of fate? Since you are so proactive. Alright, I agree. Hera thought about it and finally made up her mind. Thea was really speechless. Hera was good at scheming, but when it came to serious matters she was hesitant. Hera's personality flaw was too big. Also, you must conscript Apollo to join the battle. Also, order the 2 gods who escaped to come back. If they don't come back, they will be expelled. Thea was still a little afraid of Apollo. How could he just stand aside and watch? Forcing him to join the battle? The sun god naturally had some characteristics of light. Anyone could surrender to Hades, but not him. Unless he wanted to become a dead sun. Hera was actually very dissatisfied with Apollo. He was the only god who did not come, but Hera did not have many ways to keep him in check. I'll call Kara Danvers. You can take her to threaten Apollo. Thea also knew that Hera was not the god king. If Zeus was still the god king, no one would dare to provoke him. How dare you not come when the god king summons you? Do you still want to live? In the end, what determined everything was still strength. Thea's plan was to gather all the gods to fight Hades and completely defeat him. Of course, if she could also plunder his treasury, Thea would not mind. Accepting Hercules, allying with Poseidon, and forcing Apollo. If all 3 of her suggestions could be realized, it would not be difficult to force Hades to sign the oath. After all, what determined the world was still the high-end power. Thea even wanted to use the Flash to deal with Hermes, but it was not the time to mention it. After making up her mind, Hera made a prompt decision and went to Earth with Thea's incarnation to find Supergirl. The Martian hunter was now focused on teaching his niece, so he did not have time to pay attention to Supergirl. Apollo had hidden himself very well. However, under the authority of the Divine King, even if he was a fake Divine King, he had nowhere to hide. He had used this tactic several times. It did not matter whether it was old or not, as long as it was effective. Hera's trip was not dangerous. She only had one goal, which was to beat Apollo to the ground until he was convinced. Diana went to find Hercules, which was also not dangerous. At most, she could persuade Hercules to give up his grudge with Hera, but it would take a lot of talking. Thea's task was the most important. She had to persuade Poseidon to join the battle. Without his army as cannon fodder, the gods would be in trouble. However, the premise of persuading him was to find the location. Hera's authority did not have jurisdiction over Pluto and Poseidon. This was the agreement between the 3 brothers. They did not belong to Mount Olympus. Hera only knew the approximate location, so Thea had to find it herself. Time was tight and the task was important. They split up. Thea left Mount Olympus and went to find the Neptune couple. She remembered that there were records of Atlantis, and they might even have some contact. Poseidon, the Neptune who was spending time with Mela, was surprised by Thea's visit. He was especially surprised by the name she mentioned. Wasn't that a character from Myths and Legends? Chapter 6:11. You don't know. Thea was dumbfounded. Was there a problem with her plan from the beginning? You don't know. Mira asked at the same time. She looked at her husband in shock as well. What do I know? The Sea King, Arthur Curry, was dumbfounded by their questions. He was making oatmeal and quickly turned off the gas. With his sharp mind he realized something. Thea was confused by the couple's questions and answers. Seeing the slight change in Mira's expression, she signaled for her to speak first. Poseidon has always been a god worshipped by Atlantis. Didn't the Elder Council mention it to you? The Sea King shook his head, indicating that he did not know. He had a strange expression. No one has ever mentioned it to me. I thought you knew. Mira was a little speechless. She felt that she was being ignorant. At the same time, she was also a little annoyed. She should help her husband with his studies. He had lived in human society all his life and knew too little about many of the customs of Atlantis. Sia coughed softly when she saw the young couple's lovey-dovey look. Unlike a simple young couple, she felt a strong sense of rejection and conspiracy from it. She didn't need to think to know that it was the Elders' Council behind this. She was a political figure now, but she still didn't like politics. Unfortunately, she couldn't escape the influence of politics because she was in the middle of it. Even the evil Lord Darkseid, despite being so powerful, still had to make some compromises with politics and split up the power in his hands. For example, he let the Wasteland Wolf lead his army, and Desard managed all the affairs on the Apocalypse Star. Darkseid could kill these people instantly, but if he wanted them to work for him, he had to make some concessions. This had nothing to do with strength but a deeper problem of order. The Elder Council that the Sea King was talking about was the product of a few parties' coordination. However, she did not want to be involved in other people's affairs. She had enough problems. She just wanted to find the Sea King's hiding place. Understanding her intentions, the Sea King was very happy. Let's go. You haven't been to Atlantis, right? I'll ask the council. Besides, there should be records in our library. Thea immediately followed them. To be honest, she had admired Atlantis for a long time. The couple jumped into the water. Thea, who was already a god, did not need any water armor. She could follow the couple with her own divine power. The three of them dove all the way down and passed through several huge underwater caves. Thea followed them as they flew through the sea. Thea followed them with her divine power. 10 minutes later, they had entered the deep sea. This was a forbidden area for humans. Perhaps only the most advanced underwater detectors could observe this place. Many nameless deep-sea fishes caught sight of the three of them. Some of them chose to avoid them, while others pounced on them fearlessly. Unfortunately, they were all controlled by the Sea King's ability to control marine creatures, so they turned around and went home. How did your body survive in the deep sea? Miala was very curious as to how Thea could keep following them. She wanted to use her ability to control water to help her, but seeing how relaxed Thea was, there was no need to do so. Thea could only laugh and change the topic. She bragged that she was some kind of god, and that she could come and go as she pleased in this small pool of yours. She was not thick-skinned enough. At first, they were worried that Thea would not be able to withstand the huge water pressure. Seeing that she was observing the strange environment around her as if nothing was wrong, they stopped worrying and used all their strength to swim to the deepest part of the sea. There was no sound in the depths of the sea. It was pitch black from top to bottom, left to right, front to back, and her sense of direction was completely confused. Her well-known phobia of the deep sea was not just for show. Fortunately, her eyesight had been following the Sea King, so she did not lose him. After passing through a few trenches that had yet to be explored by human beings, the three of them entered a cave that was invisible to the naked eye at the northwest corner of the trench. They found themselves in a rugged and winding tunnel. Between the walls of the tunnel, there were some aquatic plants that were emitting fluorescent light. The tunnel was several hundred miles long. The three of them passed through the cave without making any sound. In the deep sea stood a magnificent and vast city, Atlantis. This city that had sunk into the deep sea still retained its former beauty. The blue stone pillars still emitted light even in the deep sea. Many tall and artistic buildings dotted the city like stars in the sky. The layout of the city was like two concentric circles, divided into the inner ring and the outer ring. With just a rough look, Thea could see the power structure here. The nobles lived in the inner ring of the city center, while the commoners lived in the outer ring. This was not only convenient for the expansion of the city, but also to use the lives of the commoners to buy time for the nobles to escape when the enemy attacked. Yes, Thea did not have a good impression of this group of people, because when she was looking around, an old man with a few guards was arguing with the Sea King. And from the way the old man pointed at Thea from time to time, she knew that he was not saying anything good. Language barrier. Atlantis naturally could not speak English. Some of the words were similar to Greek, but the specific meaning was not easy to distinguish. Thea cast a small spell, language proficiency. This spell allowed her to understand the language of all intelligent creatures. As for the dragon language and demon language, it was not within the range of the spell. This person from the surface must be questioned by the Parliament. Arthur, let me remind you, even if your mother let you ascend the throne, you still have to obey the orders of the Parliament. The old man pointed his finger at the Sea King's nose fiercely. She is my friend. Stay away from her. This is for your own good. The Sea King and Sia had dealt with each other a few times, so he had a good understanding of her character. She was a docile donkey. It was fine if you didn't provoke her, but if you did, you would have to prepare for your funeral. Her mother is one of the leaders of the people on the surface. I warn you, Counselor Coat, if you do not want to cause a dispute, ask your guards to return to their posts. The Sea King spent 3 days a week at the bottom of the sea, and the remaining 4 days on land. He was also a person who had social activities. The huge commotion caused by Moira's election was known by all the Aborigines of the South Pacific Ocean. Naturally, the couple saw the news, especially when they knew this person's daughter. The old man named Coat was stunned. To deal with such political figures, he had to use political means. When he heard that Thea had a background, he hesitated. Thea pretended not to understand their conversation and asked Mela in English, "Is this guy your enemy? He looks disgusting. Do you need me to make him disappear?" In fact, she was hoping that Mela would nod her head. Then she could use the eye of obliteration to make him disappear. It was too complicated to deal with gods, but it was effective against an ordinary person. Mela was shocked and hurriedly pulled her back. She gently waved her hand and pointed at the Sea King with her chin, indicating that her husband could solve this problem. Chapter 6:12. After learning about the special relationship between Thea and Diana, Mela became much friendlier towards the two girls. In her simple and honest view, as long as they did not steal her husband's woman, they were all good women. The old man's eyes flickered as he weighed the pros and cons. In the end, he gave up and a possible face-slapping scenario disappeared without a trace. Thea sneered. The Sea King couple probably did not know that the underwater world and the land were not as isolated as they thought. She, who had recently taken control of the underground world, knew that there was always a secret channel between the two sides. The only thing that could make both sides sit down and talk about benefits. The seabed was rich in pearls and items from sunken ships. These things could be sold at sky-high prices on the surface. Similarly, the surface world had a wide variety of medicines and chemical products, which were very popular among the underwater nobles. It was true that the seabed was vast. Unfortunately, there were many things that could not be found underwater, so they could only seek help from the land. Both sides took what they needed. Thea even knew that her medical cabin had been smuggled here, which showed how frequent the interactions between the two sides were. No one knew when this secret channel was built. The people in charge of this channel had changed countless times. Some people worked for their entire lives and still did not know that the people they were dealing with were the legendary Atlanteans. After chasing away the annoying flies, the Sea King couple led Thea to the city center. "As you can see, their attitude towards me is definitely not friendly. Let's ask my mother directly. She definitely knows the whereabouts of Poseidon." "Your mother?" Oh. Thea was a little surprised. Of course, it was not because the Sea King had a mother. Other than those who jumped out from the cracks of rocks, most people had a mother. This was normal. Thea was curious why his mother was still alive. Feeling that the development of things here was a little different from what she remembered, Thea decided to listen more and see less. The three of them entered the city through the main gate. Along the way, the civilians looked at Thea with surprise. She naturally did not wear a hood when visiting other people's cities. At first, she thought that the civilians were admiring her appearance. Then she realized that something was wrong. The admiration was still there. More of the civilians were shocked that a person from the surface could appear here so openly. "How can they tell that I'm a mainlander? Is there such a big difference between me and you?" Thea did not understand. She felt that she was no different from the Sea King and the others. Could it be that there were only so many people in Atlantis and everyone knew each other? "Ha ha!" The Sea King laughed heartily. "To you it's an extremely small area. We have gills but you don't." The Sea King pointed at his own neck as he spoke. Thea took a closer look and realized that there were indeed tiny air holes on both sides of his neck. However, the Sea King's hair was exuberant, so they were well hidden. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to tell. After this brief interlude, Thea calmly accepted everyone's gazes and followed them into the inner circle of the noble district as if nothing had happened. "My mother passed the trident and the throne to me. She has now retreated behind the scenes. She is very kind and wise. She must know the answer to your question." Along the way, the Sea King would occasionally introduce the current situation of the city. When he talked about his mother, his words were filled with pride. It was another old woman. This was the only thought that appeared in Thea's mind. There were many more old women in this world than expected, and they were all political figures. Her own Moira, Diana's biological mother Hippolyte, the Sea King's mother, Luther's mother, In the Sea King's impression of his mother, she was kind and considerate. Without looking, Thea knew that it was all an act because her own mother was the same. The three of them did not go to the palace. Instead, they went to a small courtyard not far from the palace. According to the Sea King, after he inherited the throne, his mother was still close to guide him. When they stepped into the courtyard, a person rushed out in a hurry. The person had black hair and a black vest. His gaze swept across the Sea King and the others, pausing for a moment on Thea's face for some reason. After that, he left without looking back. That bastard Amu doesn't respect Arthur at all, Mela said indignantly. The Sea King did not have much prejudice against this half-brother of his. In fact, he even fantasized about being respectful to his younger brother. When the three of them walked into the house, they were all stunned by the scene in front of them. A mature woman was lying in a pool of blood. There was a sharp blade in her back that pierced through her chest. "Mother!" the Sea King roared. Mela was stunned and hurriedly went to check the wound. Thea rolled her eyes speechlessly. In an instant she thought of many things. Conspiracy, conspiracy, and conspiracy. Unlike the two naive children of the Sea King, she thought deeper and further. However, all the explanations could only be verified after the fact. The most important thing now was to save the mother. "I'll save her." Thea asked Mela to stand aside. This girl had no experience in treating people. The Sea King's mother was about to die. How could she use water to freeze the wound? External injuries could be treated in this way. However, in this situation, the more her body temperature was lost, the faster she would die. She raised her hand and used 3 healing spells on the mother to keep her alive. Thea immediately took out her special medical cabin. Magic was not omnipotent. For fatal wounds like this, some surgical methods were more effective than magic. Thea scanned the woman's organs with her supervision. They were similar to those of modern earthlings. However, she did not dare to be careless. Coincidentally, there were many books in the study of the Sea King's mother. She found a medical book and started reading. With the help of the time acceleration enchantment, she finished reading all the medical books in Atlantis in just 30 seconds. Next she started to work. She built an extracorporeal circulation system, cleaned the wound, and used magic to promote the self-growth of the cells. "There's a poison in your mother's body that's resisting my magic. I need some time to study this poison. It's best that we go to the surface to treat her." Thea's treatment was extremely fast. Sometimes she felt that she was about to become the god of medicine. "We have all kinds of equipment in Atlantis. Why don't we treat her here?" The Sea King was a little puzzled. He was relatively naive and did not smell the thick smell of conspiracy in the air. Thea smiled bitterly. "If I'm not wrong, Atlantis will soon not belong to you, but to them." Huh. The couple did not understand such a strange sentence. Fortunately, someone revealed the answer for him. He, who had been paying attention to his mother, finally realized something. There was a hubbub of voices outside the courtyard. Many voices were inadvertently heard. "That person from the surface killed the queen. We must avenge the queen. Arthur is also an accomplice. They were all bewitched by the people from the surface. Let Sir Amu lead us to avenge the people from the surface." The sudden turn of the situation stunned the Sea King couple. They did not know how things turned out this way. The old man who blocked the way before did not seem to be afraid of my political identity. Instead, he used it. They want to start a war. Thea was speechless as she revealed the answer. Chapter 6:13. Seeing that the Sea King and his wife were still in a daze, she continued her analysis. "I don't know if the real mastermind is your good brother, but to be able to come up with such a plan in such a short time, this person is very good at planning. First, she got rid of your greatest support, your mother, and then framed me. This was a very ingenious plan. Not only did she deprive you of your throne, but she also used my identity to turn the ordinary people's love for the queen into hatred for the people on the surface. Do you understand now?" Thea finished and looked outside again. The ice wall made by Mela would not be able to hold them off for long. Moreover, the enemy had already assembled the advanced troops. It could be said that this plan was not made in a day or two. "I don't believe that Amu would do such a thing. He must have been bewitched. It's all those elders doing." The Sea King didn't believe that his relatively honest younger brother would do such a thing. Thea could only remain silent. She did not want to get involved in other people's family matters. Originally, she only wanted to ask for the address of the Sea King and then retreat. Now that the situation was escalating, these people actually wanted to launch a land attack. Were they too free? Wealth from war was indeed good, but the current Earth had to preserve every bit of vitality in order to face future enemies. Not only the people on land, but the Atlanteans at the bottom of the sea were also part of the Earth. Every sacrifice would be a great loss. Unfortunately, she was compassionate for the sake of the big picture, but some people treated her as a pushover. "It's that woman. Kill her and avenge the queen," someone in the crowd said. Judging from the voice, it was the counselor who blocked the way. Many of the civilians were bewitched. The mastermind knew these people's personalities very well. He chose those who were usually very impulsive. Seeing that they were holding all kinds of spears and sticks, Thea put on her hood again. She was afraid that her sneer would be seen. At the same time, she accumulated magic in her body. Even if she did not kill them, she should teach them an unforgettable lesson. "Stop, all of you, stop." Sea King Arthur waved his trident in front of her. In the past, the crowd would show a certain degree of respect when facing the trident, but today the queen was lying in a pool of blood, which made them burn with anger. "Arthur, remember that you are our king, not some surface person. Hand over the woman behind you, and we will still respect you. The Elder Council will judge her fairly." A bunch of people were talking at once. Mela had been comforting Thea, afraid that she would go on a killing spree and cause a bloodbath. "Listen to my explanation. Thea's not the murderer. She entered the courtyard with us. The real murderer is." He hesitated at the end. The crowd was in an uproar. It could be seen that the Sea King still had a certain amount of prestige, so they tried to give him a chance to explain himself. "It's OM. We saw OM hurrying out of the room." The Sea King painfully told the truth. He thought that the crowd would calm down, but he had underestimated MU's reputation in Atlantis. He had also overestimated the credibility of his words. He lied. OM is not that kind of person. "Arthur, you traitor of Atlantis, how dare you frame your brother who has always respected you?" The crowd finally exploded. Compared to Arthur, who had only been here for a few years, they trusted OM, who grew up in Atlantis, more. One grew up on the surface and the other grew up beside them. Who would they trust? Subjectively, they believed and agreed with OM, which naturally caused them to be disgusted with Arthur. Perhaps OM was the most suitable king of Atlantis? This thought instantly appeared in everyone's mind. Thea was speechless when she saw this scene. The other party had accurately grasped Arthur's mentality and made him cut off all ties with his people. As long as he protected Thea, he would automatically give up the throne. If he did not protect her, a war against the surface would break out at any time. The situation took a turn for the worse. The angry civilians no longer had any concerns. They grabbed their weapons and rushed towards the three of them. The Sea King kept shouting, telling them to stop and listen to him. Unfortunately, these people thought that they had found the truth. The chaotic roars drowned out his explanation. What should they do? A serious problem appeared in the minds of the three of them. Thea did not have any scruples. She wanted to use her strength to defeat these ignorant civilians, and then reveal the real culprit. With her supervision, she saw a large number of soldiers walking out of the barracks and starting to gather. Their target was this small courtyard. Atlantis lacked a lot of medicine. This was not because of their lack of technology, but because they lacked some necessary materials. Their technology was very advanced and they were all equipped with energy weapons. Thea did not know how big their army was, but as far as she could see, there were tens of thousands of soldiers with advanced weapons marching towards this place. Unfortunately, she looked at the unconscious former queen. If she was not poisoned and unconscious, she could easily suppress the rebellion with her prestige. Now she could only choose to avoid it. "Arthur, the enemy's army is very close. Let's save your mother first." Thea stopped the Sea King, who was still arguing with the civilians. If they did not leave now, when would they? Tens of thousands of people against her, it would be very difficult if they could not kill her. If the Atlanteans had some advanced technology, it would be awkward. The Sea King and his wife knew that she had the ability to teleport. After thinking about it, they could only choose to retreat. The real intention of the mastermind was to force them to leave. The army gathering was more like a signal. The Sea King needed time to save his mother, and they also needed time to reorganize their army and go to the surface. As long as the flames of war were ignited, racial hatred would form. Even if the queen appeared again, it would not be so easy to resolve. Both sides were racing against time. Now, it was up to Thea to save the queen and return to Atlantis first, or their army to the surface first. Mira controlled the seawater to disperse the civilians. Thea brought them directly back to the metropolis. She had a large number of instruments in her laboratory that could detect toxins. In order to speed up, she also called Poison Ivy to help with the examination. Modern technology checked again and again, but in the end they could not analyze what kind of poison it was. Thea suspected that it was a secret recipe of the palace, or a toxin refined from some substances that were extinct on Earth. However, her magic did have a miraculous effect. She used a large amount of magic to wash away the toxins. In addition, Poison Ivy also created a plant medicine that neutralized part of the toxins. After an hour of hard work, the queen finally woke up slowly. She looked around for a long time. She did not recognize the environment in front of her. Unlike ordinary Atlanteans, she had lived on the surface before, and it was during that time that she met the Sea King's father. The oxygen content in the air told her that this was the surface. But how did she come here? Chapter 6:14. Thea left some space for the mother and son to talk. She walked out of the room and browsed through the information that Gideon had collected. While they were treating the injured, the other party was not slow either. The large number of troops could not be gathered in a short period of time. However, they were ruthless enough to send out a small team of about 100 people to attack the surface. These people were kamikazes. Their purpose was to sacrifice their lives and start a war between the two sides. When they first saw their battleships coming out of the sea, many citizens took pictures, thinking that it was a game show. It was only when the Atlantean soldiers walked out of the battleships and prepared to shoot at the crowd that they realized the danger they were in. Fortunately, or rather unluckily for these people, they chose Gotham as their first stop. The simple-minded citizens of Gotham City had never seen plasma weapons before. However, when they saw these people in strange outfits and assumed shooting positions, they all chose to evade out of reflex. As a member of the Gotham family, even the normal citizens had a bonus to their dodge. For example, Master Bat could dodge bullets with a light jump and dodge Omega Ray with a heavy jump. This was an external sign that their dodge attributes were stacked to the max. The kamikazes fired for a long time, but they were dumbfounded to find that no one was killed. Only a few were injured. Were the people on the surface so fierce? A shadow appeared in the hearts of the kamikazes. Of course, they were not tired of living and wanted to die. Instead, they had noble morals. At least from their point of view, they were very noble. When the small team set off, the Elder Council advocated that they would take down America in 3 days and conquer the world in a month, returning Earth to the embrace of Atlantis. Looking at it now, this goal seemed to be a little difficult. Before they could walk out of the ominous situation, a large cloud was flying towards them. This could be called a nightmare for them for a long time in the future. As a person who only slept for an hour a day, Batman saw an unfamiliar force enter his city and open fire without saying anything. He immediately rushed to the scene in the Batfighter. He met up with Batgirl and Third Robin, and the three of them beat up more than 100 people. They did not die, but severe injuries were unavoidable. Thea was secretly glad when she saw this. Batman's principle of not killing was sometimes troublesome, but sometimes it was useful. Arthur, a small team from Atlantis, landed 10 minutes ago and was wiped out. She hurriedly told the Sea King's family the good news. The Sea King was a little dumbfounded. On the one hand, he was surprised by the opponent's speed. On the other hand, he shared the same thoughts as the more than 100 of his injured clansmen. Were the people on the ground really that fierce? No one died. You probably know that it was Batman who stopped them. Thea thought to herself. Not only did she stop their evil deeds, but these people would probably have to spend the rest of their lives in wheelchairs, if there were wheelchairs at the bottom of the sea. I have to make a trip to Batman's side. His troops will continue to emerge. Humans must be prepared. Thea was speechless. Coordinating the cooperation between superheroes and the government was undoubtedly her mission. It would take time to resist the enemy's army, time for the Sea King's mother to recover, and time for them to return to Atlantis and set things right. Many troops were already on their way to the surface. Even if the order was changed at the last minute, there would be those who refused to obey the order. Thea could only coordinate and build the humans' defense line first. If a few casualties were unavoidable in this war, it would have to be the Atlanteans. She checked the Queen's injuries again. Her physique was also very strong. It was just that the residual poison had suppressed the speed of her recovery. Optimistically, it would take more than half a day for her to recover to the point where she could seize power. This was not a game. Even if her HP was full, she would not be able to recover. There was an upper limit to healing skills. The growth of cells could not be too fast. This was determined by objective laws. The Sea King couple also had mobile phones. Thea told them to keep in touch while she teleported to Gotham. She had lost count of how many times she had been to the Batcave, but she still did not like the dark environment here. What made her even more curious was that no matter when she came to the Batcave, Master Bat would always be dressed the same way. Who was he showing off to when he was at home with a hood? Look at him wearing Kevlar all day long. It would take him a lot of effort to go to the toilet. Batman was used to Miss Thea coming and going as she pleased. He was studying the energy weapons of the Atlanteans. He glanced at Thea from the corner of his eyes. Is the enemy this time related to you? Thea cried out that she had been wronged. She explained everything from the beginning to the end. Just by looking at Batman's eyes, she knew that her explanation was feeble. The Atlanteans. Batman had also investigated the Sea King. He even had a set of black manta ray tights. He was not completely ignorant of this underwater country. Anyway, this is what happened. These guys. Thea looked at the men of sacrifice who were knocked out by Batman with a strong anesthetic. These guys will have to be returned later. Don't go overboard. Thea's words were to leave the rest to fate. Batman would not give up on the research materials at hand. With his personality, he would definitely test the Atlanteans' various numerical values. How much heat they could withstand, how much pressure they could withstand, how long they could survive in a vacuum environment, and lastly their magnetic field and resonance frequency. After leaving the Batcave, they went to the Kansas farm. Superman was at home accompanying his wife who was about to give birth. After hearing Thea's description of the current situation, Superman immediately said that there was no problem. He would not hurt the Earthlings and could not kill the Atlanteans. He had no pressure in doing this. After that, Thea greeted the various superheroes and leaders of various countries. 3 motherships, 10 giant mechs, and 80 small mechs were all ready for battle. The vanguard of the Atlanteans had already set off from the deep sea. 2 submarines cruising in the Atlantic Ocean were attacked by them. Fortunately, Superman arrived in time and saved the submarines. The dark clouds of war shrouded the entire world without the knowledge of ordinary citizens. Rio de Janeiro, the coast of Florida, Caracas. We have seen the enemy landing. The frontline troops have all assembled. The mech troops are ready. A lot of intelligence gathered at the Pentagon. General Swanwick had a bitter face as he deployed the defense. He was originally a black man, but now his face was even darker. Mr. President was too lazy to do anything to save his reputation. When he heard that the Atlanteans were invading, he did not ask about the details at all. He hid in the basement without saying anything and pushed everything to the Department of Defense. In a private call to the minister, Mr. President very happily delegated power, and said that even if he was defeated, if he wanted to sign the surrender agreement, he could sign his name. He didn't care about the pillar of shame in history at all. There was only one condition, and that was to not disturb him. It was just an empty reputation. He had long put it aside.